Welcome to the New England Canada Business Council Charging Ahead webinar on electric vehicles, what's coming in 2022 for Quebec, New England, Atlantic Canada. I'm Peter Howe from the Board of Directors and President of the New England Canada Business Council. And I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Nos participants au webinaire québécois, bienvenue, merci beaucoup, et voilà tout le français que vous devez écouter de moi aujourd'hui. I also want to be sure to say a big thank you to our generous sponsors, Hydro-Québec and Liberty Utilities and the Quebec Government Office in Boston, and especially Marie-Claude Francoeur, Laurence Gagnon, Michael Pizzaferi, been tremendously helpful in recruiting our terrific roster of speakers and organizing the event today. One of the things that NECBC is best known for each year is our energy conference in November. And at our last conference, Monica Gattinger from the University of Ottawa made an observation that I think is very smart and really comes to bear on our webinar today. She noted that when we're talking about the clean energy transition, there is no shortage of the what of ambition, but there is not enough conversation about the how of implementation. And so what we are really hoping today will be about is the how of implementation when it comes to accelerating the deployment of electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging technology, the public-private partnerships, and the workforce development that support EV technology. We have many great lessons to learn from Quebec, which many of you may know, some of you may not know, #2 jurisdiction in North America for electric vehicle rollout after the state of California, with more than 120,000, I think it may be more than 125,000 EVs on the road. So many great lessons that we can learn from our friends and neighbors in Quebec. Wearing my broad-based business association hat, I think we can observe that when we talk about the clean energy transition, there will always be a good, healthy debate about how much priority, how much funding should be applied specifically to electric vehicles within the overall transition to clean energy. That said, it's very clear that many of our provinces, most of our New England states, have made very aggressive commitments to rolling out EV technology by 2025, by 2030. So we think it's a terrific conversation to have about how do we actually meet these promises and these goals that we have set for ourselves. In addition to implementation, interaction is a big theme today. We want to make sure that we have plenty of time for interaction among panelists and for your questions and answers in each panel as they come along. So we're looking forward to short, concise, very interesting initial presentations from our panelists, and then a lot of give and take, a lot of conversation, a lot of questions and answers from you. Let me now move to introducing our keynote speaker, Madame Marie-Claude Francoeur, who is the Quebec delegate to New England. She's been serving in that role since May of 2014, officially in her second term as Quebec's delegate. And a leading voice, sharing Quebec's vision around climate change, energy, transportation technology, labor, francophonie, and somebody we have been delighted to have as a neighbor, associate, and friend for coming up on 8 years. So with that, Madame Francoeur, let me turn the microphone over to you.
Bonjour à tous, et merci, Peter, for your leadership at the helm of the NECBC and for your enthusiasm to host and organize this event. It's greatly appreciated. Before I start with my remarks, though, I would like to just let all of you know that yesterday Forbes came out with the 100 best employers in Canada, and Hydro-Québec scored #1. So not only is it a great company, but it's also a great employer. So I just wanted to share this with you because I think it's such a great news. So congratulations, and I'm looking forward to hearing from France a little later on. So before I start, I find it helpful to begin with some data points on Quebec, just to put it in the regional context. Quebec has a population of 8.5 million. It's a little over 50% of that of New England's. However, this population is spread over a very large territory, which is 9 times the size of New England. It is the largest province in Canada and holds 3% of our planet's freshwater reserves. Quebec shares a border with 4 American states, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. So when we think about climate change and reducing GHG emissions, we consider a regional approach. Not only do we share a border, we share the same water and the same air. We might not always consider the same tools to achieve our objectives, but we have built an understanding and developed strong partnerships driven by common goals and values, and we have come together as a region. Quebec started its journey towards decarbonization in the late 1990s, following the Saguenay flood of 96 and the spectacular ice storm of 97. The impacts of climate change hit us very hard and very early on, and we collectively decided to tackle the issue. In 2006, the Quebec government put in place a series of climate action mechanisms, including the Electrification and Climate Change Fund, that have generated important economic benefits and that have given us the means to walk the walk on climate action. So from 1990 to 2017, those are the latest numbers I've got, Quebec's emissions went down by 8.7%. During that same period, our population increased by 18.6%, and the GDP grew by 66.4%. Since then, almost $3 billion Canadians have been invested in initiatives to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. 2/3 of that money was invested in incentives to adopt EVs and public transportation initiatives, particularly important in the rural parts of Quebec, where roughly 50% of our population lives. In fact, one of the largest EV dealerships in Canada is located in a small town about an hour north of Montreal. The clean tech industry has seen the creation of 45,000 jobs, and that contributed to $5.7 billion to our economy. Just over a year ago, the Quebec government adopted the 2030 plan for a green economy. Just like many of the New England state plans, Quebec aims for a carbon neutral economy by 2050, with a focus on reducing emissions while growing the economy and creating new jobs. As I mentioned, we have made great strides towards this goal. In 2021, we surpassed our goal of 100 EVs on the road, which is nearly half of the total Canadian EV fleet, even though we make up for less than a quarter of the population. There are presently, as Peter mentioned earlier, 125 EVs registered, and by 2030, we are aiming for 1.5 million. And after 2035, the sale of gasoline-powered cars will be banned, and we'll be joining our neighbors in Massachusetts with that policy. So there are ambitious goals for sure. The recipe is quite simple. You need more than a dash of political will and leadership, strong adoption by the private and public sectors, and partnerships at all levels. Simple doesn't mean easy though. Here in the Northeast, we're fortunate to have the willingness, the parts and pieces to make it happen. Quebec does not build electric cars like Ontario, but we build buses, trucks, and we do make batteries. Our territory is home to the critical and strategic minerals necessary, such as sustainably and responsibly mined lithium and cobalt. Today, opposing economic growth and the environment is no longer a viable statement. And a good example of that is Taiga Motors, which is a Quebec company that makes electric snowmobiles and jet skis. They raised $100 million last year when they went public. Another great example is Lion Electric, which most of you know because of their school buses. They're just out of Montreal. Their order books is full, and they are now expanding and opening a facility in the United States. Today, you will hear from leaders on both sides of the border, from the private sector, utilities, and technical schools, all of whom are working together to ensure the clean energy transition. I am particularly excited to hear from Flow, Canada's largest EV infrastructure supplier, who is now expanding in the US. You will also hear from Saint-Jérôme College in Quebec, who developed one of North America's leading EV maintenance and building programs. As you consider the policies necessary to achieve your own climate and transportation electrification goals, please know that in Quebec, you have a friend, a partner, and an ally. I will now turn the microphone over to New Hampshire Senator Jane Shaheen, a champion of the US-Canada relationship, who agrees that joining forces on common challenges does benefit communities on both sides of the border. Merci beaucoup.
Hello, and welcome everyone to this cross-border conference to discuss our shared infrastructure goals. Special thanks to the New England Canada Business Council, the Quebec government, Clean Energy New Hampshire, and others for coming together to organize this event. This is an important time for innovation in our energy and transportation sectors. Climate change threatens the environment, health, and livelihoods of those in New Hampshire and around the globe. That's why I was proud to work with a bipartisan group of senators and President Biden to pass the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, legislation that will make a historic $550 billion investment in our nation's infrastructure. Now, I could spend all day talking about the many aspects of this legislation, but I'd like to highlight just a few key areas of the bill today. The bipartisan infrastructure law includes several provisions to address the threat of climate change. It includes $5.25 billion for zero and low emission buses, another $5 billion to electrify school bus fleets, and $7.5 billion to build the United States' first ever national network of electric vehicle charging stations. In addition, the law provides $27.5 billion to improve the resilience of our power grid and support an economy-wide transition to clean energy. The law also allocates $351 billion for repairs to our roads and bridges and provides significant funding for passenger rail and public transit. For water infrastructure, the law provides $55 billion to bring safe drinking water to homes and protect water sources from harmful pollution. And as we've all learned over the course of this pandemic, high-speed internet access is vital to our communities in today's economy. I'm proud to have served as a co-lead negotiator with Senator Susan Collins of Maine on the broadband provisions in the bill, which will provide $65 billion to bridge the digital divide, hopefully even in our most rural communities. And that's just a drop in the bucket. There is much more offered by this law to restore and rebuild infrastructure across the country. These investments will create opportunities across the border with Canada and will strengthen our countries in the global fight against climate change. Thank you again, and all the best for a very successful conference.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Shaheen, for those wonderful remarks. I really appreciate the way that the Senator puts the electric vehicle movement in this broader context around climate and environment and electrification of transportation. And Marie-Claude, would love to hear any reactions or thoughts you have based on the Senator's remarks, in particular opportunities to collaborate across the border. You know, the Senator talked about the new funding for a national US network of EV charging stations. Obviously, we'd love to have those sync up as best they can with the charging station network in Quebec and all our neighboring provinces.
Well, I'd be happy to. That's great from Senator Shaheen, and thank you so much for allowing her to be part of this great conversation we're having today. Quebec is very fortunate to border states such as New Hampshire that do believe in the complementarity of the Canadian and American economies. That's key. And as a region, we believe that in these uncertain times, North America's economic recovery will depend on trade policies that do support innovation and promote our common prosperity, as well as the well-being of the workers and their families. So as we look to the future, and the demand for electric vehicles is going to be skyrocketing, and we're already sensing that trend, please remember that in Quebec, you have a partner that offers tools and resources to confront the climate crisis with the urgency it demands. We're in this together, and trust me, please, when I say we've got you covered, rain, shine, or blizzard. So definitely agree with that. And I just wanted to perhaps add also that Quebec does have quite a few companies that are working, and would be more than happy to partner up with some American companies. I'm talking about IVEO, which is a nonprofit organization that works with small and medium-sized municipalities to find sustainable mobility solutions. There are other companies that are working on retrofitting diesel trucks and turning them into electric trucks. So there are plenty of opportunities for partnering and working together. As far as charging station goes, we've already started working with our neighbors for a few years already. And I'm thinking of Vermont, for example, and we're very well advanced into that corridor. We're also working with New Hampshire and Maine, so we can actually make sure that we can enjoy the beaches and the beautiful white and green mountains when we go and visit in our EVs. So we're very much looking forward to partnering on all of those fronts. And please do remember that we're here, and we're quite pleased to be a neighbor and a part of that regional conversation.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. And we do have a few minutes in the spirit of maximum interactivity. Would love to invite our participants and panelists, frankly, before we get going with our first panel on public-private partnerships, just would open the floor to all of you for specific questions that are top of mind for you today, or topics that you are especially hoping that we will get to in our conversation today. So Emily and Susan, let me ask you if you might open the lines and see if people have initial thoughts to share. All right, well, we will certainly, go ahead.
I'm not seeing anything come through yet, Peter.
Okay. Certainly one thing, Madame Francoeur, in your remarks, you noted, we obviously are talking a lot today about electric cars, but would love for you to have the chance to say a little more about what Quebec is doing around electric buses, electric school buses, you or any of your colleagues there who might have more to share on that part of the electric vehicle opportunity. Even electric snowmobiles, which sound awfully fun.
Yes, thank you, Peter. So as I mentioned, we do have a very important cluster when it comes to EV. And I also want to maybe go back a little bit on the battery sector, because that's going to be key for North America, especially considering where the materials to produce batteries are sourced. So, the lithium battery sector does hold incredible potential for our region. And the Quebec government has launched a series of integrated strategies and action plans to develop the battery industry, which includes critical and strategic minerals. An example of Quebec company to partner with would be Evlo. They do design and manufacture utility scale batteries, and they are looking to expand and sell their technology to New England. Since they were developed by a utility, their batteries are some of the most reliable and the safest in the world. So that's, a component of the whole sector. We mentioned the buses and the trucks. I mean, we're working on garbage trucks, ambulance, cooling trucks. The way the industry is done in Canada, most of the cars are done in Ontario. So we do the trucks and the buses. Obviously, the snowmobiles and the jet skis are quite exciting. I understand that Bombardier is going to be coming with a line of their electric toys for, I don't want to say adults because they're used by many, but they're going to be coming with an electric line of their ATVs and jet skis and so on as well by mid 20s, probably around 25 or 26, if all goes according to what they have announced. So there's a lot of exciting things. There are a lot of pieces that are being put together. So it's not only one sector that's moving forward, but it's the entire motion sector that's actually being activated and going electric.
That's great. Now, I'm the happy owner of a battery-powered lawnmower. I'm not sure how much Quebec or Canadian technology may be in it, and I'm very much looking forward to getting a battery-powered snowblower. I have friends who have those, and I know we will all need snowblowers this weekend, so looking forward to that. I know we have a question from Timothy Egan, New Hampshire State Representative Tim Egan, who's also a Vice President of the New England Canada Business Council. So Tim, let me call on you.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay, Marie-Claude?
Yes, thank you.
So recently in the New Hampshire House legislature, there was a bill filed to create a fee for EV vehicles because EV vehicles would not be utilizing gasoline and therefore not pay into the gas tax program within the state of New Hampshire. That bill is in committee and being discussed. It doesn't look like it's going to happen, but I wanted to know if there were any policy discussions or issues like this that has happened in Quebec, knowing that EV vehicles reduce funding to the state from gas taxes, and how has Quebec dealt with the idea that that revenue might disappear? I'm a proud owner of a Subaru Crosstrek, so I'm also concerned about a fee that would be charged to an EV vehicle. But I also do understand as a state legislator that gas taxes in the state of New Hampshire go to our roads and bridges and infrastructure development. So I just want to know if you've had any experiences in this topic in Quebec.
Thank you, Representative Egan, for your question. So right now, there have been questions raised like you have in the United States. On the other hand, what is happening right now is pretty much the rollout of EV policies in order for people to adopt that. And most people consider that whatever will be saved by going with EVs will probably be reinvested in a different manner on the roads. So that's the gamble that's being made right now. And, as I said, the primary focus is to get people into EVs, since we're going to be doing better with air pollution and so on, and costs will probably be decreased and lowered in other sectors where the government is spending money right now that will be reinvested onto the roads. That's what my take is at this time on this. And as you know, we do not, in Quebec, for example, we only have a couple of toll bridges. So most of the roads that belong to the province are financed out of a fund that comes out of the transportation department. So we'll see how they adjust to that. But right now, the priority is to get everyone into an EV.
Thank you very much. I look forward to following up with you as we know what this legislation does, because it will impact visitors that come to the United States from Canada. So I do appreciate your comments. Thank you, Peter, for taking my question.
Let me introduce his panel, Michael Stoddard from Efficiency Maine Trust, who's leading our panel on the financing and the creation of public-private partnerships to roll out EV technology. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today, and the microphone is yours.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks to everyone at NECBC for inviting us to participate. We are very pleased to see this discussion happening anywhere and any time, but especially with our friends from Quebec and New Hampshire and Vermont. It's great to be having this conversation. We're pretty deeply engaged in questions about how to structure our expansion of the EV charging network in this state. And so it's a great opportunity to hear what other people are thinking and doing. For those who don't know, Efficiency Maine is the independent administrator of all of the energy efficiency programs in the state of Maine, as well as a lot of programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we are tasked with investing and managing all of the utility funds for demand side management programs, as well as all of the RGGI funds that come to Maine for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And we have been the organization that administered the VW settlement funds and are looking forward to administering funds coming out of the federal legislation that will be used for EV charging infrastructure. So we've got our hands full. We've been doing this since about 2018, and that started with the VW settlement funds we received at that time. When we started working with ChargePoint, who won the initial bid to install and operate a series of 7 DC fast charging stations. So I'm joined today by Dedrick Roper, who is the Public-Private Partnerships Director at ChargePoint, and he will be one of our panelists. And also by Bill Howell, who is the strategic initiatives lead at Irving Oil. Irving won in a competitive solicitation held earlier last year. They won 4 out of the 7 locations. And so we're looking forward to having them play an increasing role in EV charging infrastructure in Maine. And then finally, I'm joined by my colleague, Amalia Siegel, who is the program manager for EV initiatives in Maine. And she's got some PowerPoint slides queued up that I hope she could run through right now to give you a quick introduction to what's going on in Maine with EV infrastructure.
Great, thank you, Michael. And great, here are the slides. So as Michael said, my name is Molly. I am the program manager for EV initiatives at Efficiency Maine. And I'm happy to share a brief description of where we are in Maine in regards to public electric vehicle charging and some lessons that we've learned through administering several rounds of competitive funding for charging in the state. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So the goals that we have for the deployment of public EV charging, one, to strengthen the Maine economy by reducing drivers' energy costs, promoting tourism, of course, from neighboring provinces and states, and then to advance Maine's progress toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. And then some of the objectives that we have towards those goals. Number one is to facilitate market transformation towards electric vehicles. We have a rebate program for EVs, which Efficiency Maine administers. So that's an important part of it. And then, of course, the charging side is very important as well. We have an objective to expand the network of DC fast chargers for those certain situations where DC fast charging is the best solution. And we also focus on level 2 chargers where they're appropriate for extended charging. We focus on assuring equitable access to EV charging. That includes both geographic equity as well as income and economic equity. So we focus on those different aspects of equity in all of our program design. And then to attract and complement funding from various different sources, whether it's federal, private funding, or other sources. Next slide, please. And then specifically looking at the DC fast charging network, some of the targets that we have are to focus on serving drivers who require that fast charging, where they really need a quick charge and not the longer duration level 2 charging, to really enable EV travel from all corners of the state, north to south and east to west, across all of the major thoroughfares and to and from our neighboring states and provinces, to deliver a positive customer experience at these charging stations, to have a target distance between chargers of 50 miles or less, and then to encourage sustainable operations through the appropriate use of competitive bidding, market solutions, of course, public-private partnerships, and public funding sources. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of where we are in Maine in regards to public charging. So of the initiatives that Efficiency Maine has funded, we started with the VW funds, and through that we were able to install 14 DC fast charging plugs. And then in the past year, we've awarded 14 more plugs, which are under construction at the moment. And with some remaining funds that we have from the NECEC settlement, we'll be installing around 10 more plugs, DC fast charging plugs, towards in the northern part of the state, going up towards Canada. For level 2 charging, we've awarded 156 plugs at public locations, municipalities, workplaces, state agencies, and multi-unit dwellings. Some other sources of funding for EV chargers so far, we had a grant from the Maine Public Utilities Commission, where we funded 50 level 2 plugs, and Central Maine Power was also part of that, and they were able to install 60 level 2 plugs at public locations. And then the rest of these points that you see on the map that were not funded through our initiatives are funded through private investment. So whether it's Tesla, Electrify America has some DC fast charging plugs in the state, and then independently funded, whether it's businesses, workplaces. There were some grants through CMP and Avangrid Foundation So that's what you see on the right. That's the entire public charging network, not just those that have been publicly funded. So it is getting built out. It's getting better every year. And we really hope to be filling in this map quite a bit more in the next couple of years. Next slide, please. Just a little discussion of our future plans for EV charging in the state. We have laid out by fiscal year what we hope to accomplish in the different regions that we hope to reach specifically with fast charging. So as I mentioned, for the next year, during 2022, we hope to award funds to install fast chargers in Aroostook County in the far north and also in Washington County, and that will allow drivers to travel from north and south and over to the eastern border, which currently is very difficult given the lack of public charging infrastructure in those areas. So we're really focused, number one, on gap filling on these key corridors that will allow people to cross the state. And then in subsequent years, we have plans to come back to some of the more populated areas and fill in charging there. And then we also have some other significant gaps on Maine's highway network that we will need to fill with fast chargers in order to achieve that goal of 50 miles or less between charging stations. We also have a focus on trying to serve the needs of people who don't have access to charging overnight. So whether that's people living in multifamily dwellings or more low and moderate income folks who don't have access to home charging, that is going to be a priority. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to share a little bit about what we have learned through the rounds of competitive funding that we have done. There are different types of public and private partnerships that we have contemplated or that we have experience with. So as Michael mentioned, in phase one, ChargePoint was a single charging service provider that put out a bid and was awarded to own and operate all 7 charging sites in that round. So that is one model. Another model was more of what happened in this latest phase, which we called phase 3, which is where we received bids from a variety of different business owners, property owners, or installers and third parties to operate these chargers. So for instance, a convenience store owner who would like to see charging come to their business in order to attract more customers to their convenience store. That's one example of a public-private partnership. Next, an installer or another third party who put out a bid to own and operate these chargers. So Revision Energy is an example of someone who will be operating chargers through phase 3. And then some other models that we have contemplated but have not been put in place yet is the idea of working with other public entities. So whether it's a university or a municipality or possibly a governmental agency to install chargers on those properties rather than at a private business. And we can talk about this later about when this might be an appropriate use of public funds, but we do think it's important to have these different strategies in our pocket as we look at achieving geographic diversity in our very rural state. Next slide, please. Okay, and then just a couple of the considerations that we find have been important in building these public-private partnerships. So of course, considering who's responsible for the long-term maintenance and operation of the chargers. Obviously, Efficiency Maine or whatever governmental agency is administering these funds has an interest in keeping these chargers operational for the long term, but sometimes it makes more sense for another entity to be the one that's really responsible for that. So figuring out what those contractual arrangements look like. Of course, a concern in rural areas especially is how likely is the host site to be able to recover operating costs, especially demand charges. So I'm really looking at what those economics look like and what is that host site going to need in order to make this station be really feasible. And then of course, looking at which locations are seeing investment from the private sector. We don't want to block out the private sector. We want to make sure that if they are planning to invest in these sites, that they have the opportunity to do so. But I think that's the last slide, and I'd like to turn it back to Michael and the next panelist.
Thank you, Molly. Let's keep moving it along. Why don't we go to Bill Howell next, our colleague from Irving Oil, who has worked with us over the last few months on getting prepared for their next set of EV chargers in Maine. And Bill, if you are close by, please turn on your camera and give us a little overview of things from your perspective, and then we'll go to Dedrick next.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Hopefully folks can see and hear me okay.
Yes.
Great. Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate this morning, Michael, and the New England Canada Business Council as well. We appreciate being part of this. I've been with Irving since about 2008. Most of that time, I have been involved in our retail business and our C-store operations, most recently responsible for our New England network. Our company has recently put together a team that's strictly focused on alternative energy. And I've been fortunate to be able to join that team. And my current focus now is really leading our long-term strategy for alternative fuels, including electric vehicle charging, both in North America and in Ireland, where we have some locations and a business in Ireland as well. Irving, as a company, we've been providing services and good energy to travelers across the Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and New England region for almost 100 years. We started in 1924 with one location. And really, we've expanded from that one location, again, to New England, to Ireland. We see unique aspects when it comes to the pressures of climate change and energy transition in each of the various regions where we do business, and we're learning from each region where we do business. Our operations in Quebec, as we heard earlier, have various pressures, as do our operations overseas and in the European Union. So we're actively working with, learning from the partners in those various regions, and then trying to consolidate that information and really bringing forward the best customer offer and the best customer solutions possible, because for a business, it really comes back to how do we meet the needs of those customers. On a broader scale, just to hit on some of the things that our company is doing or looking at as part of the overall energy transition. At a very high level, we are working with partners at TC Energy in New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada to really explore joint development of a series of new energy projects that are really focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as creating new economic opportunities in the New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada region. On a smaller scale, we've started adding solar panels to the retail canopies at some of our locations, really as a pilot to see how much energy we can offset. We worked with Revision Energy, who I know is here today as well, on a site that we just installed in Massachusetts a week or two ago, as well as we have solar panels on now in one of our canopies in St. John, New Brunswick as well. So interested to see how that plays out, and looking forward to being able to expand those offers. On an even smaller scale, several years ago, we eliminated, as well as others, we eliminated plastic straws at our restaurants throughout our network, as an impact of eliminating almost 2 million straws a year from landfills and others. We're expanding biofuels capabilities. And then really what we're talking about here today is what we're doing in the EV charging space. So when it comes to EV charging, as a company, like we're on a continuous journey to work on our environmental footprint, again, with a customer focus. So EV charging is an important part of this journey, and we're going to continue to find ways to provide the goods and services that the customers need. So within the EV charging space, we're already moving, and we're connecting the communities. In Atlantic Canada, we're a leading fast charging host already. We're actively, as Molly and Michael mentioned, we're actively working with Efficiency Maine on 4 locations in the state of Maine. Those will be under development this year. We have a site in Providence, Rhode Island that's currently under construction as well. We worked with a program in Rhode Island for funding and assistance with that. So currently within our network in Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and New England, we currently have 28 locations that do have EV fast charging available. And we have active plans for an additional 15 to 20 sites, I would say, in the next 18 months, roughly, depending on ordering timeframes and others. And we're continuing to build that plan out as we go. We talked about corridors. I know Molly showed the map of Maine, and really the importance of linking regions and finding corridors. And that's our initial focus, is really along some of those key corridors in the regions that we operate. So again, Quebec, Atlantic Canada, and the New England region. Really initially focusing on locations that have the amenities that travelers need. If they're going to be stopping, if you're driving your EV and you're going to be stopping for 15 to 30 minutes, roughly, depending on how much power you require, we're looking at our locations that have food service, that have larger stores. Safety is always critical. So we really want to make sure that there is a well-lit, safe parking area, safe location on the lot, so people can feel at ease when they're sitting in their car or going inside the store. Of course, clean bathrooms. And then even at some of our locations, one of the sites in Maine that we are excited to move forward with is our Travel Plaza in Newport, Maine. And that site even has what we call a bark park. So there is a fenced in area out front. So our 4-legged friends can take a break as well, while their human goes and charges their vehicle and purchases some treats. So we believe that we're uniquely positioned to offer cross-border EV corridors as well, based on our retail footprint and the regions that we operate in North America. So really our goal is to be able to link anywhere from Halifax, Nova Scotia, through Montreal, through Boston, and the regions in between over time, and working with entities such as Efficiency Maine, such as NRCan, such as the state of New Hampshire, to help facilitate that. We also know that, and Molly hit on this as well, not all EV drivers are going to require fast charging. There's going to be a place for fast charging as people are going on longer distance, farther away from home. But really, as part of our long-term EV strategy, we also envision and will be working with municipalities on the potential development of level 2 charging, on developers of multi-unit dwellings or places like the city of Portland, on how we can help facilitate slow charging or level 2 charging for some of those areas. And then longer term, even on home charging opportunities and how we can help play a role in that, help facilitate home charging opportunities. Really, and we greatly appreciate being part of this and being able to work on some of these public-private partnerships, because while the customer demand is coming, we recognize that it is still relatively early days in adoption, and it's going to take some time. And these funds, these partnerships, and working with folks like Michael and Molly is an important way to help facilitate this infrastructure and building out these corridors. So again, thank you very much for having us be a part of this conversation, and look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you as well for participating. It certainly enriches the discussion, because we think you, as you have described, will play a really important role in these public-private partnerships as we try to jumpstart this transition. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dedrick Roper from ChargePoint today, and I especially want to thank him for getting up very early, because he's in the Pacific time zone, if I'm not mistaken. And so to see a smile on his face is a treat, because if I were in his shoes, I'm not sure I would be looking quite so cheerful. But anyway, Dedrick, thank you for joining us, and please introduce yourself and your company, and tell us a little bit about your perspectives on the topic of this panel.
Awesome. Thank you for the warm welcome, Michael. I am really, really excited. I think, I live in public-private partnerships. And when I think about, what good comes out of those, this event, this collaboration cross-border really speaks to that. And also, just want to speak, piggyback on what Bill was saying, how Irving Oil has leveraged public-private partnerships to deploy their initial stations, begin to learn, and now look at new deployments. It's really that network effect that I've seen over the years by working through these kinds of opportunities. So as Michael said, I'm Dedrick Roper, Director of Public-Private Partnerships at ChargePoint. I've been with the company since 2015. ChargePoint was founded in 2007. We're currently at about 1,300 employees worldwide, with operations in both North America and Europe. And we manufacture charging hardware for single-family residential, multifamily, commercial, which you would see in the public setting, and fleet. We offer these to purchase to site hosts, and we provide a software subscription that enables them to customize their offering in the way that they want. So, from a multifamily property owner, it could be providing as an amenity to your residence, or in the case of a convenience store or gas station, selling it and trying to earn some revenue off the sale of electrons. For businesses that don't necessarily want to incur a bunch of upfront capital costs, we offer what's known as ChargePoint as a service, which is a subscription service and rolls those payments into an annual fee. ChargePoint's been hyper-focused on driver experience. We have a top-rated app in both the Apple App Store and Android. And we are currently at over 125,000 ChargePoint ports, plus an additional 200,000 that are accessible via roaming. And for folks that don't know what roaming is, roaming enables a driver to use whatever account they want, Flow, EVgo, Electrify America, and charge on another charging station networks without any inconveniences, any extra fees, et cetera. So when you're talking about cross-border collaboration and making sure that infrastructure works well together, the industry is working on that from the roaming perspective. In March will be our 1-year anniversary of being a public company, so trading on the New York Stock Exchange. So that's a little bit about ChargePoint. I am the Director of Public-Private Partnerships, and they're near and dear to my heart. So I just want to touch on the top bullet points the top benefits from public-private partnerships. First of all, they facilitate collaboration. This discussion here, there's discussions like this in community meetings, with Efficiency Maine, et cetera, really gets the discussion going. Gets the media involved. When you have a nice ribbon cutting event, you can get those folks out there, sort of amplifying that message, really instilling driver confidence in the community. Hey, they see it on TV, there's a charging station here. It really helps. Public-private partnerships attract investment to underserved communities, rural communities. So, locations that would not make economic sense from day one, having a subsidy from the government, leveraging cost share from the private sector, getting the community involved. There's other things that need to happen besides just installing a charging station. You got to have signage. These need to be well visible. They need to be amplified. There's a lot that the local community can do, and these partnerships bring all that together. Develop solutions to complex problems. A lot of the grants that we've worked on, early multifamily grants in 2014, there's a lot of learnings that come out of that feed directly into product, feed directly into business and the way you approach different verticals. And then obviously they help identify barriers and best practice dissemination. Our grant with Efficiency Maine, we're reporting on a monthly basis how construction is going. Then we're doing quarterly reports on uptime and how much drivers are paying for charging, even sharing some of our utility costs. There's a lot of learnings that come out of that and influence both your funding agencies, programs, but also our business. And then spurs new business models, businesses and business models. So ChargePoint, the way we approach grants early on was, we'd apply, we'd lead, we'd do everything kind of in our first phase in Maine. But really, we want to turn the script and we want to get as many Irving oils involved as possible, because that's the only way we're going to build this network out. So again, thanks for having me, and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you, Dedrick. I have some questions to follow up that I'm interested in asking, but I also want to invite folks in the audience who might have questions to do so. Peter, I think I'm going to have to rely on you or Susan to tell us where those questions would come from. I hope one of you will just chime in and blurt in if there's a question you want to bring to the panelists. But perhaps we can start with one that I had. Dedrick, going back to you while I've got you up on the screen, can you talk about some of the different approaches? You talked about some of the learnings that you have, and I had a conversation with actually somebody from the Circle K organization, which, like Bill's organization, has a lot of convenience stores along the roadways, and they're very engaged in adding charging stations. And he told us that in Norway now, they're getting to a point where the private sector is just investing in these because the volume of traffic of EVs has grown to a level where they can recover their costs, and they don't really need much public input. I'm clearly, we're not there right now. I can say that for sure in Maine, but I'm wondering what you think is the pathway. Like, what are your learnings in terms of the public role? How much and what guardrails do you think make sense so that we are moving in the direction of something that eventually grows into a private sector, market-driven, sustainable situation?
Yeah, I mean, I say we have a lot of tailwinds. I think, kind of an overlooked component of, slower EV adoption has been the lack of vehicle availability. Many of the cars did not work for everyone. Now we have multiple pickup trucks coming out, some with vehicle to grid capabilities, at a low price point. So that's one component. Obviously, the significant level of investment is going to attract significant level of investment from federal government, natural resources, Canada, utilities, et cetera, will continue to help build out the network. And with that scale, I think in the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot more dots on the map, so to speak, just thanks to a lot of these market forces and vehicle availability.
Thank you. Peter, you had a question. Can I ask you to come off mic and ask your question?
I really, for you and Molly, but possibly for all four of you, just would love to have you take us under the hood, wretched pun intended, on a little more on the process of filling out that map. I'm sure there's a lot of folks, particularly from Quebec and New Brunswick, who are very happy to see places you're going to be filling in gaps in the charging network sooner rather than later. But I wonder if you could say more, potentially, tips and tricks, lessons you've learned about how you go about most intelligently and effectively filling in that map of charging locations. I get it that some of it is every 50 miles, but also how much can you respond to market data and seeing what's getting used the most heavily, or other indicators that there's demand for more charging in these places?
Maybe I can start with an answer, since I think I'm the one who's been here from the beginning and have seen it evolve in Maine. But I suspect that for our friends in Vermont and New Hampshire, they will have experienced a similar thing, which is we have a lot of rural areas and there's just some limited choices. When you zoom in on Google Maps and start to make your way up along some of the major corridors, and you need 3-phase power for fast charging, there's just limits. And all these other things that you heard Bill and Dedrick and Molly say are the priorities or some of the criteria that we're looking for. We're looking for convenience, a good customer experience. You want them to be able to go get a cup of coffee or have a place to walk their dog. You want there to be good lighting so they feel safe. In rural parts of the state, this just is not around every single corner. So it does somewhat help focus your thinking, I think, when you come to these towns. So what we did was we started with a real core foundation in Maine. We said we need to get a couple of pins on the map in some critical spots to start linking us to our focus at that time was Quebec, because we know that Quebec has a very large fleet of EVs, much larger than any other jurisdiction around us. And also they're an important tourist source of tourism in Maine. And so we wanted to, just like Mary Claude was saying, we wanted to forge that link. So we started on the routes that connect there, and we designated those routes, but then we made it open to a competitive process. We said, these are the routes that are our priorities, and you come up with the bids. You bidders come to us with your suggestions and tell us why your place is the best. And we made traffic counts one of the criteria in the scoring that we would use. And we made all those other criteria that I just listed off scoring elements of our scoring, and we awarded the ones to the places that we thought would be the best fit. One of the scoring criteria was distance or proximity to the next closest DC fast charger. So if it was too close to the other one, that was going to get a lower score. If it was too far from the next closest one, that was going to get a lower score. So we were trying to come up with a scoring system that would create this Goldilocks kind of situation where we could get the spacing right and get good locations. I think as these new federal funds have come forward, it's gonna give us a lot more latitude to be more flexible and have charging stations that are closer to each other. But when we got that first tranche of VW money, it was very limited. So we were very picky and pretty prescriptive about where we were seeking for those stations. But I'll let Dedrick and Bill maybe say a word just to chime in on that.
Yeah, just to piggyback off, what Michael said. What I think Efficiency Maine did well was take an iterative approach, right? Like Michael said, there was this initial network of 7 core sites that needed to be developed, but then the next solicitation incorporated lessons learned from the first project to overcome some of those barriers in the rural communities, enabling individual site hosts to apply, supporting with demand charges, et cetera. So, as decision makers are starting to contemplate these build outs, I really encourage sort of an iterative approach. Come back each year, review what you've learned, and then modify your program going forward.
Bill, anything to add?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, again, with the regions that we operate, when we look at the map, our first step in the process is really to focus on those key highway corridors. Whether it's looking at 50 miles in between each charging location or whatever those parameters are, we can map out along the highway where those sites are. For us, it tends to gravitate towards some of our larger truck stop / travel plaza locations as a starting point. Again, they have larger properties that's easier to locate DC fast charging and also easier to future proof. So we don't necessarily want to try and shoehorn something into a site that can only ever have 2 chargers because it's a really tight parking lot. We understand this will grow over time, so we want to be able to approach it with a potentially a larger property that can grow over time as demand does. Again, those locations, to Michael's point, when it comes to power requirements, those locations tend to have utilities and utility connections that are more suited to something like this out of the gates. So we really look at our overall network. We've gone through this exercise and we rank sites on a 1 through 4 basis, 1 being the highest priority and the best fit, and 4 being something that's probably not going to work for a variety of reasons. And then you take that and you start overlaying other dynamics as far as potential development costs, potential costs of utility connections, proximity to electric lines, et cetera, and can start honing in and getting those priority sites. So we've gone through that exercise. We have our network relatively mapped out. There's always going to be evolution in that as we go, but we feel good about our planning process. And it's very helpful to be able to have conversations like this, to be able to build relationships with folks like Michael and Molly, and understand use Maine as the example, from a Maine perspective, the map that Molly showed and the plan for their future on the corridors or regions that the state of Maine is looking at, because then that allows a business to work that into our longer term planning cycle as well, from a capital need and a capital requirement perspective. So then we can work in tandem with these agencies and really bring this forward.
Thanks, Bill. I see that there's a question from one of the attendees. I think Bill Luthern has a question and has been promoted.
Yes, am I plugged in here?
We can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, a couple of questions. First, in building out, an infrastructure the scale that you're all proposing, I think a certain amount of standardization is needed for both safety, reliability, and such. An example, but probably not a good example, is that you don't want to pull up to one of these stations and realize that you need a 3-prong to a 2-prong type of adapter in order to charge your vehicle. So are there agencies such as the American Society of Mechanical Engineers or whoever that are working on standards for the installation and operation of these charging stations? And my second question is regarding utility rates, and what trends, if any, are you seeing in the development of utility rates for providing electricity to these stations?
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to put the first part of the question to Dedrick. I think probably in the best position to answer that technical question.
Yes, the answer is yes. There are standards bodies that are working on EV requirements. We have standard connectors today. So Bill, the issue you raised about arriving at a charging station and not be able to charge has been mitigated. That is true for all vehicles, including Tesla. Tesla uses a proprietary connector, but there are adapters available for those drivers to be able to plug into a standard charging station.
And I'll just add that when we put out our request for proposals for bids, we're pretty prescriptive about the minimum standards that we will accept, whether it's in terms of capacity for fast charging, numbers of units, plug interoperability, universal payment systems, et cetera. So there's a lot of opportunity to do that. I think we have time to squeeze in one more question. So let's go to Sam Evans-Brown if we have time.
Hey all, this is just a question for the folks in Maine, because we in New Hampshire are dealing with this very issue. When it comes to these really low utilization sites, demand charges can absolutely murder the economics of having public charging. And I'm just curious how Maine has approached that challenge, because of course, if you allow sites to have a different demand charge structure, then there might be complaints of subsidization, and consumer advocates can get exercised about that.
Yeah, it's an ongoing debate in our various policy circles here and at the Public Utilities Commission about whether there should be a rate design that simply forgives rates, demand charge rates to those fast charging locations, either permanently or for some holiday period of years until the level of EV traffic volume picks up. What we've done until any of those decisions get made, and none have been made as yet, we've just subsidized it through the Efficiency Maine funds that we have. So we didn't do this for the first round, but for the second round, the one that Bill's company participated in, we established a demand charge incentive in which we agreed to reimburse the host site 100% of their demand charges in year 1, 80% in year 2, 60% in year 3, 40% in year 4, and 20% in year 5. So we think that that buys them 5 years of time to wait for the market to catch up and create enough volume. In the really, really remote areas, we may have to try something different. I don't know how that's going to work out, but that's what we've come up with so far, and we'll see how it goes. And I think that brings us right to time, Peter. So if you want to be able to say that Efficiency Maine was on time and under budget, I think I should quit right now.
Woohoo! Thank you.
And thanks to all the panelists. Great job, guys.
An extra minute. But I appreciate everyone being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak to you all and to moderate this panel. I'm really looking forward to it. We have two excellent panelists who really know what they're talking about and can bring us up to speed on where things stand in terms of rolling out these technologies. I'd like to do a bit of table setting before we start. I am Sam Evans-Brown. I'm the executive director of an organization called Clean Energy New Hampshire. We are policy advocates pushing for good clean energy policies here in the Granite State, which of course should benefit EV drivers coming down from Quebec, because if you have searched on Google Maps how it is you get from Montreal to Boston, you shall find that you'll have an extended sojourn in the Granite State. And it's going to be pretty important if you'd like to fuel up your electric vehicle for there to be good policy here in New Hampshire. So I believe if I do have a couple of slides that I'd like to share just to set the stage here. Thank you, Emily. And we can just skip my cheesy title here and go straight on to the next map. And I'll try to click through these pretty quickly. So just to give a sense, here's a map that the Department of Energy put out recently, showing charging stations in every state. And the second slide there, as soon as we get it up, we can zoom into the New England region and see what's going on, and hopefully. Great. So if we zoom into that, if we head on to the next slide there we go. So there's New Hampshire with 296 public charging stations. That's both level 2 and level 3. Level 3 being the very fastest chargers. Vermont and Maine, both of which have around, they have substantially less population than the state of New Hampshire. Both of them have more chargers than New Hampshire. And I will note, of the 296 that New Hampshire has, a substantial portion of them, that 27% that are DC fast chargers are Tesla specific stations that have been installed by Tesla and of course not available to other drivers. So if we head on to the next slide, just to show this in a bit more starkly. So this is a map of fast chargers, and you'll notice that there's a big blank spot in the middle of the map. So the question is sort of what's going on in New Hampshire, and what is it that is the roadblock to creating a network that folks will find useful to connect these border regions and make travel throughout northern New England and Canada more feasible. So next slide, please. Part of the problem here is that New Hampshire has taken a very long time to spend the monies that were set aside in the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust. And I apologize, the formatting is a little off here, but what I was trying to do with this slide was give you just a rough ballpark of when a lot of these funding sources were going to come online. Right now, New Hampshire had a failed request for proposals in which it tried to spend the money that was set aside for EV charging in that Volkswagen Trust. There were no responses, and now we're on to the second attempt to spend that money. And hopefully, so the deadline for submitting your proposals is at the end of the month in February. And hopefully we are going to see those monies start to head out in sort of Q3, Q4 of 2022. Meanwhile, the two utilities have put forth substantial dollars to do make-ready investments. So that's Eversource, which is the state's largest electric utility has put in $2 million that they have intended to support the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust and do the sort of in front of the meter electricity work needed to get those charging stations ready. That's $2 million. Unitil, which is a much smaller utility, has actually proposed substantially more for their very small service territory, which is mostly around the capital region in Concord, but also out on the seacoast around Portsmouth. They've proposed $4 million to install fast chargers and level 2 chargers, mostly actually on main streets by retrofitting lampposts, by retrofitting lighting and turning those into level 2 chargers. So they've proposed $4 million for those two territories. And then also sometime, hopefully in 2022, we'll start to see money start to roll out from the federal infrastructure package. The situation there is a little bit murky. There was a request for information as to how to spend those dollars that closed at the end of just actually a couple of weeks ago, and but then what they will do with that request for information still remains a little bit unclear. But it is clear that these monies will be sent to the states, and the states will have to submit a plan for how they're going to spend the money, and hopefully we will start to see those dollars head out the door before too late in 2022. So I would guess, Q2, Q3 in 2022. So needless to say, there is substantial money coming online to fill the hole in the donut that is the charging network in New Hampshire. Emily, you can take the slides down if you'd like. And so the question I think that I'd like to pose to our panelists is, okay, so as we're starting to see funds come into place, how should those be spent? And sometimes being last over the wire, as New Hampshire is in this case, can be a benefit because you can learn from what the folks who came before you have done. And so with that in mind, I'd like to hand things off to Rose, who is going to tell us about their experience. And Rose, please, if you would, I tend to prefer in these types of panels for folks to introduce themselves, because I'm sure you can do a much better job of talking about yourself and your background than I could. So off you go.
Very, very good. I'm going to pull up my slide deck. I promise not to give anybody death by slideshow, but I think the photos are helpful. So just give me one moment. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of the panel today. Thank you, Sam, for the for kicking things off. My name is Rose Lenoff. I lead governmental sales at Flow for the East Coast market. I have focused quite a bit of my time on the Mid-Atlantic and in the Northeast to get charging stations in the ground, working with municipalities and state agencies to take funding and making sure that it's deployed equitably and in locations that are really going to help spur overall EV adoption. But as background on Flow, who we are and what we do, Flow was founded in 2009 in Quebec. We got our first charging stations in the ground in 2011. And now in 2022, we have well over 65,000 charging stations deployed across Canada and the United States. We manage the largest charging station network in Canada. We manage about 65 or 70% of the Canadian market. And in the US, we are the third largest network provider of stations. Our mission as a company is quite simple. We look to provide the best charging experience for our customers being anybody that touches the charging stations, our mobile app, the data that comes from the stations. And we deliver upon this promise and this goal by being vertically integrated. We both design and manufacture our charging station hardware equipment in-house, designed and shipped out from a plant in Shawinigan, Quebec, though we are establishing a plant in the United States as well, which we will be announcing probably in the next few weeks. Very exciting. But in addition to designing the charging station hardware equipment, we're also the network and the software operators of the stations as well. You can see on the bottom of the screen that just a few of the companies that we work with. This is by no means an exhaustive list, though it is some of the largest partners that we do have in the Northeast and in Canada's East Coast, along with some of the OEMs that we work with. Actually, just last week, we announced a partnership with GM where Flow is providing exclusively providing charging infrastructure at GM's workplaces. We have about 400 charging stations in the ground already, but that number is going to grow to probably closer to 2,000, and it's a mixture of level 2 and DC fast chargers. At Flow, we understand that it's not a one size fits all, so we design a wide range of level 2 and DC charging stations to fit different use cases. We have deployed stations curbside in New York City, in Los Angeles. The charging stations that we deploy in an incredibly dense area, not going to be the same stations that we deploy in a rural area like a ski chalet up in Vermont, or a more rural destination somewhere up in the Northeast. With our DC fast chargers, we take into the same level of consideration. We have two different capacities, 50 kilowatt and 100 kilowatt, and we're in the process of designing and going through certification for higher capacity stations right now. Across the board, with all of our charging stations, whether it's a curbside station in NYC or a station mounted to a utility or a light pole, or our DC fast chargers, all of our stations have been designed to support 4 seasoned environments. Our stations can withstand temperatures as low as -degree Celsius, which is also Fahrenheit. Fun fact. Flow is the most northern deployment of stations in North America, up in Alaska. Like you can see here, we have stations up in the Yukon, and we're continuing to deploy stations throughout the Northeast that have similar weather constraints and situations. All of the stations across our portfolio are made with ruggedized aluminum. There's limited plastic components in the stations. Plastic expands and it contracts, which will lead to downtime and result in failures of our stations. So the stations across our portfolio are really made for long-term use, 7 to 10 years useful life. We have stations that we deployed in our first round in 2011 that we still have up and operational. So to showcase how serious we take cold weather climates and environments, Emily, do you mind taking over the screen and showcasing that video real quick? Thank you. So that's it for me in keeping track of time. I'll pass it back to you, Sam. But really happy to answer any questions on Flow, or any questions that come up. Please feel free to ask.
So we'll pass it over to Barry Woods from Revision Energy for now. But please do remember, we would like this to be as interactive as possible. So if you do have questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box or raise your hand, and the moderator will unmute you to ask your question live. So Barry, take it away.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. I was going to try to get my correct screen set up here. So pardon me. I hate this when we have a little bit of downtime to think I can get it up here. In the meantime, my name is Barry Woods. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today. I'm the Director of Electric Vehicle Innovation with Revision Energy, and I'm going to stop the screen. And Emily, can you set up the slide deck that I sent you? Maybe that would be easier. I'm not sure why mine isn't. Perfect. Thank you. So anyway, I'm Director of Electric Vehicle Innovation with Revision Energy. You can go to the next slide, Emily. And Revision is inherently a New England-based energy transition company. We have over 330 employees. I think we're a $100 million company at this point. We're also unique because we're 100% employee owned. We're also a certified B Corp, which I think is a significant distinction. I'm not sure there are any other solar companies. I think we were the first solar company to become a certified B Corp. And our primary mission is to help transition customers off of fossil fuel. To date, I think we've probably done about 10,000 projects in New England. We have offices in Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Primarily a lot of solar, residential and commercial customers. I've been setting up the electric vehicle charging infrastructure division for about 5 years. This February, I'd say we probably have to date done about, well, several hundred commercial scale level 2 projects and maybe about 30 DC fast charging projects throughout the region. And we've worked with Flow and ChargePoint. We work with a variety of technology providers. I think we try to be agnostic in terms of technology and try to fit it to the particular application. In Northern New England in particular, to kind of reflect on some of what Michael's comments were, utilization rates are still very low. And so technology that works in other parts of the country from an economic standpoint is a bit more of a challenge. So I think that's something that we, have had a fair amount of experience to date. Emily, you can go to the next slide. And in terms of services, just real briefly, we actually do everything from the design through the entire build out, including picking the technology. We're also doing a lot more service and maintenance as these infrastructure sites get laid out and need work, as any fairly sophisticated technology does from time to time. We've developed a lot of partnerships there, in particular ChargePoint. We try to look at projects where we feel we can complement the EV charging side with the photovoltaics, because I think it's pretty clear clean energy and clean transportation are a really natural mix. We also engage pretty actively in consumer education, and whether that's through newsletters or panels and so forth, because I think it's a really critical thing still at this stage to give consumers exposure to the technology. And we're also, as just part of our DNA, always looking at innovative models where we can continue to expand business opportunities, and that would include things like bi-directional charging. We're doing more owning and operating these days. We're looking at fleet-based applications, not only from the charging standpoint, but how can we use solar for fueling? So that's just kind of give you a taste of the broad scope that we're involved in, and that I think the kind of jobs that the industry itself is going to, I think, be offering for a variety of folks. Next slide, Emily. And I was just thinking to give, this is, I want to keep cruising through because I know Peter wants questions, but it's good to kind of get an idea of projects just so you can see what they look like in the ground. These are actually in Maine, but we've done a bunch in New Hampshire, and I apologize for the Maine-centric display here. But there's ChargePoint level 2 on the left. We actually have got some charge points at Concord now near the State House that we put in that Revision is owning and operating, which is a good opportunity for us to learn the ins and outs of the business model, not only for ourselves, but so we can help inform our customers better. The next slide, second from the left, shows the level 2 type applications that we've been involved in, particularly in Maine, but this is the type of technology that New Hampshire is going to be looking to be investing in over the next year through their VW funding. Third one over is an EVgo DC fast charger that we put in at one of the Hannaford stores, retail supermarkets. That was one of the first ones in the state of Maine. We're seeing a lot of retail industry interest in providing DC fast charging. And the last shot is actually a basic charger, kind of a no frills, reliable, low cost option, which some host sites find attractive for a variety of reasons. In this case, this is LL Bean. to bring in shoppers and who will stay for an hour to two, get a charge, and presumably more than repay the debt to LL Bean over the course of that time. So that's just to kind of give you some idea. Next slide, Emily. And I think this is important metaphorically for folks, because even though we're talking about EVs, when we being Revision and a lot of folks who are involved in this space, look at the cars, what we're really looking at is rapidly becoming a critical link in the overall energy distribution chain. And so even though this is a residential facility, it could easily be a commercial facility. And what I want you to think about going forward is the fact that the car is really a battery with four wheels. And when you tie that battery into a grid-based system that might have photovoltaics and clean energy, you really create a whole range of opportunities with a car that we never would have ever imagined in our past lives. And that's important going forward as we think about using this technology and how best to deploy it. Next slide, Emily. And I think it's important to think about what is it that attracts clients. When we talk to folks about why they're drawn to EV charging, I think there's a variety of reasons. Usually it's a blend. I think it's important to think about these as a prospective host site. Incentives like the type Sam is talking about that are going to be flowing and are flowing into New Hampshire. People that are interested in new technology and its benefits, folks that are sustainability oriented. There's typically a huge attraction for commercial folks. The economics of driving electric, particularly for fleet applications. Climate change and the emission reduction benefits of driving, I think, are key to getting many folks to look at the technology, attracting EV drivers, like I mentioned with LL Bean, and then the power of the EV PV connection are just a couple of other reasons that folks look at the technology. Next slide. And when we're thinking about where do we put these in, thinking about the question of Michael, particularly with rural locations, I think you have to, like most situations, walk before you run. And the technology is very different than a gas station model. No offense, Bill. The reality is that most people charge at home. And the convenience element of that in and of itself separates this type of transportation from our existing experience. But I do think it's really critical to have the DC fast charging networks developed adequately in all of these states. And so money that's spent in that area in particular, I think, is money that's really well spent, not only from the visibility standpoint, but because it facilitates tourism. It also facilitates people to getting over this range anxiety concept that I think was probably valid during the first couple of years of the technology, but is becoming much less of an issue. But you can see, I mean, there's a variety of contexts where the cars are staying still for long enough periods to get some energy benefit from charging. And that's the kind of opportunity that we need to be thinking about. Next slide, Emily. And so I'll wrap it up, but again, happy to take questions. Appreciate the invitation very much, Peter, and NECBC, and what's been going on in particular in the Quebec province as a way to help promote, lessons here in the Northeast.
So we do have some questions coming in, but I'm going to take my prerogative here as the moderator. I'd like to ask the first question because this is one that I think is really pertinent, because there are so many possible business models that could support charging, and I'm curious, both Barry and Rose, which you have seen predominating so far. In particular, Barry, you pointed out LL Bean. I think one of the big difference between EV charging and filling up a car at a gas station is that if it's going to take you 20, 30 minutes to get a fast charge, that's time that a retailer, every minute you spend in a retail location could be, money in the bank. And so to what extent are folks really relying on selling the energy versus to what extent are folks, looking to other business models?
Well, you seem to direct that to me initially, and I'll save some time for Rose to chime in as well. I think there's a lot of variety of approaches to the business model. LL Bean is certainly an example that mimics many that we've seen, including Walmart and Target and stores where the more time you spend inside, the more dollar value, they've got formulas. So if you can get new drivers new customers, new drivers equal new customers. I think that makes a big difference. Hospitality industry is another good example of that application where they wouldn't get a lot of customer nights, but for offering Tesla and other types of chargers, to prospective travelers. I think the cost of electricity is a big driver in people's consideration on the business model. It is much lower than gasoline. In a high use environment, it can also mean that it's real money. And so you do see ChargePoint and smart charging as an option, being offered. So it is a little bit across the board based on the strategic location, the mission of the facility that's trying to host it, and what they're willing to bear in terms of costs, which is, I think, a good way to see how this technology can be used and adapted to fit a lot of different applications.
Rose, do you want to take it?
Sure. With different charging companies, you see different business models coming out. Some companies own and operate the stations. Other companies like Flow, our main business model is to sell the station. We have a network, an operating fee as well, and that allows us to remotely monitor and manage the stations, though they are owned, excuse me, by the site host. It like Barry said, it really depends on the location and the economics of the situation. In some cases, it makes more sense to own and operate. In other cases, it doesn't. But having funding from different state agencies or drop down from the federal government really helps offset the capex of stations and can really make that business model work out in a much more financially viable way over a 5 or 10 year period.
And for both of you, I'm curious. We have two questions, both about bi-directional charges, and I'm curious to what extent that is something that has started to roll out. To what extent you all have any experience with, what is known in the space as V2G, vehicle to grid, and having that be another business model. Why don't you go first this time, Rose?
Yeah.
Okay. Flow is actively monitoring and following the market as it continues to develop. It's not a product that we have out for retail sale at this time. I don't know if the technology is really there yet. You also, if you take a look at the batteries that are inside of the vehicle, oftentimes if you do V2G, it means that the batteries that the cars aren't eligible for different rebates or different programs from the OEM itself. So we're taking that into consideration as well. Our main focus is on charging stations that are used, generally speaking, by the public. We don't focus on, let's say, like overhead charging or heavy duty bus charging, and sort of V2G kind of falls into that category as well. We're following the market and we're developing technologies, but it's not something that we'll be launching anytime soon.
It's a very captivating topic, and it's been a topic for the subgroup of sort of EV advocates for a while, but it didn't really get the play until Ford released the F-150 Lightning and that round of ads and things. And it's very interesting to see the impact of that, that a good ad can have. And I do think it's a thing. It is early. We are seeing a number of players, to Rose's point, working with specific vehicle manufacturers to kind of get around some of the battery warranty issues. One of the areas that I think is getting a lot of play lately is in the school bus area, because you've got buses that have large batteries, limited daily use actually, and especially seasonal use as well. And the idea of bidirectional means that you can use that bus battery as a backup generator, and I think that's something even in the residential context that gets people captivated, particularly those of us who have backup generators because of, grid reliability issues. It kind of opens up a whole different way to look at how the vehicle can assist. So I think it's a thing. It's early, but it's enough. There's enough grid benefits to drive, I think, market investment to make it, get realized sooner rather than later.
And I would just add that what I have seen so far has been pilot programs largely driven by the utilities. So utility owned charging stations and utility controlled charging stations. And I think the utilities probably need to get a little more comfort and facility with the technology before we'd start to see them offering up some sort of rate that would bring in third parties. Why don't we go, Peter, you had said you had a question. Why don't you hop in with yours?
Sure. I was interested, Sam, in your chart that you presented about funding sources to fill the donut in the hole that is New Hampshire when it comes to electric vehicle charging. If I did my math right, it's about $26 million altogether, $6 million from utilities, and counting on a big chunk from infrastructure bill. Is it possible for you to contextualize that number for us a bit? $26 million versus how much of the need, in your view, do you think that actually meets to get New Hampshire to something comparable to, Maine or Vermont for EV infrastructure?
Well, since you directed it to me, I'll take a stab at it first. What I'll say is that I think that if we were to see all of those monies spent, we'd probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of just catching up to where Maine and Vermont are now. And that if you look at studies of how much EV charging infrastructure will be needed nationwide in order for a fully electrified transportation sector, it's really just a tiny bite of the apple. I mean, I think if you were to scale the numbers down that I've seen to sort of per capita and then look at New Hampshire, I think we're really talking at least in the hundreds of millions of dollars range. But I'd also like to hear from Barry and Rose on that question. Do you have thoughts, Barry, in particular? I know.
I think it's really hard. I think that's very hard to have a crystal ball in terms of the impact of, you think about Norway, and Michael's comment how, there's a viable business model now for independent businesses because of the amount of vehicle use. And I think New England is a long way away from Norway. And, I think Tesla probably provides as accurate a roadmap as any for successful deployment of superchargers. And it's no coincidence that when you see where they get when you see where the state investments get made, a lot of times they're pretty close to where the Tesla superchargers are, because everybody comes to the same conclusions about the strategic value of those locations. So, I do think it's a down payment because the transition is massive, and the cost of DC fast charging, Peter, per unit is, depending on the site, it's in the neighborhood of 100 to 150,000 and going up, because people want to have faster chargers available, which means higher voltage supporting infrastructure. The charging hardware has to deal with heat issues and makes the charging hardware that much more expensive. So the numbers are not going to get smaller. I certainly can predict that.
Great. Tim Egan had a question. Tim, do you want to chime in?
Can you hear me well, Sam?
I can.
Thank you. Actually, my question is for Rose, and it's a little more of a practical question. As we begin to see RFPs get executed for developing infrastructure for EV charging. So I'm a representative in the state of New Hampshire, but I live in Sugar Hill. So I live in the White Mountains, where actually probably today, right now, at this second, it's about minus 17 degrees outside. And I noticed, I was taken by your photos of how is the science of the EV charging stations to the hand chargers. Again, I mentioned earlier in the panel that my wife and I own a Subaru Crosstrek, and there are times when she goes to the charging station and the charger is frozen into that. Is there technology or innovation that's going to be driven, knowing that folks are going to apply for grants? Do they have to factor that in, or is Flow sharing that kind of information? Is that proprietary information? Every great invention we have has a spin-off of other innovations. The terrible analogy here is the selfie stick to the iPhone. But are there technologies that Flow is looking at to keep the charger handles warm so they can easily get utilized during cold weather temperatures, especially here in the northern Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And maybe the video was gimmicky that I had show, but one of the colleagues, he takes a hammer and he smashes the ice to get the connector out to be able to plug into a car. we know that with more EV adoption, we're going to see in the greater, availability of electric vehicles on the market means that more people other than white men in their 50s and 60s that are highly educated are going to have EVs. And it means that more women and genders and sexes and different classes of people are going to be using the charging stations. And so taking these different design considerations and how people interact with the stations is very much a part of our product roadmap as we continue to scale up higher capacity stations and developing additional types of level 2s as well as DCs for the public to use. We're also taking a look at, it was mentioned before, I think it was, maybe it was Bill's presentation, that when people use charging stations, they want the area to be well lit. People want to feel safe if they're going to be sitting in their car for 20 or 30 or 40 minutes. They want to know that they're in a well lit area so that the charging station itself, not just where you pay, is lit, but maybe the entire area. And this is very much a part of what we're doing right now as we continue to design and roll out stations. I don't know if that answers your question, but I would say keep an eye on flow and continue to look out what we're pushing out to the public. And I think your question will be answered.
I'm curious for. I mentioned in the last panel the effect of demand charges on the business model for public charging. I'm not sure how different the rate structure is in the Canadian provinces, and if there has been some sort of relaxation of the idea that demand charges need to be put onto charging stations. So that's part of my question here for you, Rose. But I'm also curious, when it comes to installing storage on the site of chargers, that of course would let you manage the demand charges because you'd be able to meter out flow from a battery so that you're not drawing on the grid so much. Has that been part of any of your installations yet so far?
Sure. So to answer your first question, we're going to have, I believe Frances speaking from Hydro-Québec, and she can speak more, I'm sure it'll come up in her presentation, but speaking more to the deployment of stations throughout the province and how the utility has managed that. So I'm going to put a pin in that and pass the buck over to her to answer that question. In terms of battery storage, it's definitely something that we're looking at and that we are constantly exploring. We have not deployed anything with that technologies as of yet, but as battery storage and just the industry continues to grow, it will be a part of what we do and in different deployments, both in rural and in more densely populated areas.
And Sam, I mean, I think battery cost has been a huge impediment, I think, to more broad applications, which is just that's just a relative thing. It's going to go down. I mean, there are companies, I'm thinking of one called FreeWire that incorporates batteries into its DC fast charging and can trickle charge off of a single phase, which is kind of convenient and an interesting model, particularly for rural locations where usage won't be high and where three-phase is not available, but also demand charges, as you mentioned, can be a huge impediment to any kind of actual revenue. So I think the battery angle is something a lot of the network providers and manufacturers are going to incorporate as it becomes more economically feasible.
So then I'm curious if when we're looking at this question of rural deployment at low penetration levels where we just don't have a ton of cars on the road yet, but we've got this chicken and egg problem where we're not going to have a ton of cars on the road if people are still feeling that range anxiety before they buy a car. And so there's this need to roll out charging stations perhaps before they're profitable. From what you've seen, what are the main tools that are working? And is it really just that we need to, pony up some money up front, a la what the infrastructure deal does and what the Volkswagen deal does?
Sorry, Rose, I'll jump in real quick. I think that it's a huge transition. it's not something we've ever confronted, you know, reworking all of transportation. And there are legacy interests, you know, in terms of maintaining the status quo. And so I think the nature of the investment is huge, and it's really important to have incentives and to be able to come up with partnerships, public and private partnerships that can, you know, that can stack those incentives. You know, I think rural New England, because of low utilization, is a particular challenge for business models, and it means you're going to have to bite the bullet and probably do more public investment, which over time, you know, will pay off. But I also think pickup trucks are going to be a solution to a lot of this issue. When we see, it's the flip side of the charging infrastructure world. Until we get cars that people want to drive, believe me, you'll figure out a way to charge a pickup truck when it goes 0 to 60 in 3 and can haul your house off the foundation. You know, I mean, so I'm not overly concerned about, you know, if it's going to happen. It's just a question of when, and making those investments now is perfectly a good strategy.
I'll piggyback off of that and say it's so crucial to have these partnerships, whether that's from the utility or the state or the municipalities that can help with the permitting process. All of these different entities need to come together to get the stations in the ground and up and running. And it's a paradigm shift, right? Like, we don't need to put charging stations. No offense to the folks here that work at you know, that are gas station companies as well, but we don't need to just put charging stations there. If 80% of charging happens at home, we really need to be creative about the other locations, that other 20%, and bringing all of the stakeholders together to sit at a table at events like this and discuss what works and what doesn't work really is going to help push the needle. And I am very excited for different trucks to come out, pickup trucks to come out. Can't wait for Rivian to actually get vehicles on the market in the Ford F-150, whenever that's going to happen. But it's really it's such an exciting time right now. And all of the stakeholders sitting at the table is really going to push the needle over the edge to make things really move.
So my personal anecdote is we just bought our first electric vehicle at our home. It is a used Nissan Leaf. And has a very short range, and it's been very cold since we bought it. So I'm still very much feeling the range anxiety every time we try to take it anywhere that's you know, farther than just downtown from home. And so I would also second the idea that the vehicles really will be a big game changer, right? Because a lot of the concerns that we're talking about, I think, are stemming from the first generation of EVs, and as the ranges start to increase, we may have many fewer of these types of discussions as people start to get comfortable with the technology.
Sure, and we're also going to have an influx of used EVs hitting the market after that point as well, which means that we're going to have an even greater level of penetration of other groups, low income, just people that want to have a second car that's an EV. It'd be great for the market.
My name is Jonathan Dowds. I'm going to be moderating the last panel discussion today about workforce development needs related to this pretty exciting energy transformation that's going on right now, energy and transportation transformation. As a little bit of background about myself, I'm the Deputy Director at Renewable Energy Vermont, where our mission is to promote 100% clean renewable energy, much of it generated right here in the state, we hope. Prior to that, I worked at the University of Vermont's Transportation Research Center, so I'm really aware of how transformative this is, both on the electric power side and on the transportation side. And calling out, recognizing, as Barry Woods presented in the last presentation, there's really a great synergy between this technology, this vehicle technology, and clean renewable energy, so that's very exciting. In fact, two of our members, iSun and SunCommon, are both working very actively now in developing solar charging canopies, where you can have a carport with a solar canopy and potentially charging in areas where there isn't the kind of grid connectivity that you would need for a connected station. Just to provide a little bit of context about the workforce development needs that we're facing. The Advanced Energy Economy group recently put out a report on California's projected workforce needs as it relates to electrified transportation. And since California is often, at least with respect to electric vehicles, referred to as the Quebec of the United States, I thought it would be appropriate to give this a quick shout out. Essentially, this report is projecting very rapid growth in the workforce needs for electrified transportation. The report states that there are currently 35,000 people in California working in this sector and projects it to grow to close to 70,000 in the next 2 years. This goes all the way from manufacturing, wholesale distribution, retail sales, installation of electric vehicle charging equipment, and maintenance of both the vehicles and that charging equipment. So really runs the gamut of the things that are involved there, involving careers from electricians, auto technicians, all sorts of engineers who are working on the development of the car, and planners thinking about where we want the charging infrastructure. So it is a very big lift to get ready for really large scale electrification. In the United States, there's some significant federal dollars that are being committed to that. The DOE and DOT have a $7.5 billion initiative to build out charging infrastructure. And obviously the car manufacturers are increasingly dedicating resources to this. To make this transformation happen, we're going to need a lot of people who have some new and specific skills, both on the automotive side of things and also on the charging infrastructure side of things. And we have two great panelists today who are working on developing those skills in the workforce regionally. And so without further ado, I'll pass the torch over to Eric to tell you about what they're doing at St. Jerome.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. Thanks to all. It's a real pleasure for me to be a part of this event today. Thanks to the NECBC for the invitation, and also to Marie-Claude and her teams for all the support. What I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk to you a bit about, well, what we're doing here in St. Jerome regarding these new skills, regarding the EV maintenance and fabrication. I'm going to talk to you also about who are we working for in this project, who are our partners. And talking about partners, I'll end it up with talking about our latest, but not the least, partnership with the White Mountain Community College. Well, so first of all, starting in 2016 in St. Jerome, the St. Jerome College was the first educational institution in Quebec and Canada, and probably at that time in North America, to launch a training program dedicated to the specialized skills needed to work on EVs. As a college in the Quebec's educational system, our mission is to form new technicians for the job market. And in the EV world, that means technicians able to offer tech support for the engineers, the engineering teams, and that makes sure that production lines within the manufacturers are operating properly with top quality, and also will be able to take care of the maintenance of EVs when they're on the road. These new graduated technicians that we're forming since 5 years are hired at the end by EV manufacturers, EV fleet owners, and also EV maintenance companies. So we were the first to develop these new skilled workforce, and I would say that we're proud to embrace this pioneer role. But we're not the only pioneers in the EV world. We're not the first. In St. Jerome, it is since the year 2000 that research and development institutions were created to work on EV development. And still today, the Innovative Vehicle Institutions, IVI, is a leader in research and development regarding the transport electrification, sorry about that, and also the EV developments. The Innovative Vehicle Institution was our first partner in that project of building that program, the training program, and it's still our closest partner because it is an institution that is affiliated to our college. So we're working with them day in, day out. It's a team of 20 engineers and 5 specialized technicians, and so you can these technicians working with the IVI were trained, are graduated students from our program. Also, I would say that in Quebec, well, the idea of EV development is in the air since sooner than year 2000. Hydro-Québec is having people working on this since the 90s and maybe even sooner. Third of all this research and development doing in our region and educational work takes place in what we could call a very dynamic economic ecosystem regarding EVs. We have many EV manufacturers in Quebec. Marie-Claude has named a few of them earlier. So just remember, we're manufacturing buses, trucks, boats, motorcycles, off-road electric vehicles, but also there's development in forestry electric vehicles, agricultural electric vehicles, and mining production vehicles also. We have also EV components manufacturers, batteries, motors, wiring and harness, and as we saw in the earlier panel, of course, charging stations. So the demand for skilled labor workforce is increasing regarding the EVs, and our partnership with manufacturers and the Innovative Vehicle Institution allows us to make sure that our training program is updated year after year, make sure that we are following the evolution of EV technologies. Talking about partners, well, our newest one, and not the least, the White Mountain Community College. So we've been in touch with Chuck's team since several months, well, probably in the beginning of the pandemic. And so we're working with them, and I'll let Chuck maybe present a little more with more emphasis his project. But what we're going to do here, since we're giving a program aiming at these skills for the EV maintenance and EV productions, well, we're going to provide them our teaching material for a few of our courses, and also offering coaching for their teachers. Our teachers will work with their teachers offering coachings, and of course, any collaboration that would be needed along the road of their project. So as pioneers in EV trainings, development of the EV workforce, we're glad to work with other pioneers in this area. So that's a great project for us to be able to work with the White Mountain College. So that's briefly what I would have to share with you today. I'll leave the word to Chuck to continue on the project.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Eric, and Jonathan. Thanks for moderating, getting us together here. Chuck Lloyd, I'm the president at White Mountains Community College. And first, I'd like to thank the NECBC for inviting me, being part of this. I've already learned so much. You heard from Eric, the pioneering, the starting of things. New Hampshire clearly has some catching up to do. And just this relationship's been important. So I'd also like to extend thanks to Senator Shaheen, her video earlier, just her ongoing support. Representative Tim Egan, who I know is on this, has been a great encourager and collaborator to bring these relationships together, as has Representative Linda Massimilla. St. Jerome, you've just been awesome. Obviously the pandemic has not helped us at all to physically come together with the border closures, et cetera. But with technology, we figured out some of it, and I look forward to to next steps. For us, just a little overview. I've personally been at White Mountains Community College for just about 5 years as president. I've been within the community college system for about 19 years. The community college system is spread out across New Hampshire. So as we talk about this relationship, workforce in New Hampshire, it is not just the North Country we're focused on. It is broadly across the state. We have 7 colleges, 12 locations, and White Mountains Community College specifically, we cover the northern half of the state, the northern 3 counties. We're in North Conway, Berlin, and Littleton, which, as you're well aware, is on the 93 corridor coming down from St. Jerome specifically. When we first started talking about workforce and how it relates to electrification in our vehicles, I said, well, geez, we have an automotive program. We have a diesel heavy equipment technology program. We also have an industrial maintenance millwright program, which, all of those individuals currently are looking for a workforce, and we've really broadened the programs themselves. In collaboration with St. Jerome, one of the things we're working on is the infusion of electric vehicle technology. Another shout out to Representative Egan. He encouraged us to work closely with Electrify America to obtain a grant. So we've got a grant to support some of this work. We were very lucky to get that. And we have started the curriculum development, sharing. And let me just tell you as an aside here, Eric is just a great collaborator. By no means is there, this proprietary information. There's such a sharing and encouragement. And I'm seeing that across, all of these panels we've talked about, is I think we're all in this, not just for us to increase workforce, but also to increase access, going forward. So we've set some pretty aggressive goals, and I'm sure Eric could agree with that. As we already have a course that's about to kick off this summer. We're hoping to have a certificate available for next year for our current students, but also for people out in the existing industries, working at dealerships, and all of a sudden you're seeing more hybrid or EV cars coming in, and understanding how to work on those. But also down the road, we're looking at transfer opportunities where we cap out at the associate degree level. There is a baccalaureate degree partner sitting right in front of me here, in Eric in St. Jerome, that potentially our students may want to pursue further education. And at the community college level, that's one of our primary roles, is to work on transfer articulation partnerships. So we see that as just another way to have a relationship here. We are building a new facility over in Littleton. It is a 10,000 square foot facility right off the highway. That is, we're calling it our advanced technology lab, because we are beyond just diesel heavy equipment. All of our partners, our advisory boards, are saying, yeah, sure, diesel is a piece of what we do, but all of that off-road equipment, we're starting to really infuse battery storage, electrification, and even the on-road trucking aspect of it as well. So we have a new facility going in, and we are being very intentional now. What sort of power infrastructure do we need to have as we're building this to plan for the future? So that's literally in the works right now. And I guess the last piece I'll wrap up with is there's a current skilling, there's a reskilling, but there's also the upskilling aspect to this, of folks that are going to continuously come back for more training, more information. And I think that's part of our relationship with St. Jerome is once we get an initial foundation, I see this as an ongoing upgrading, trying to catch up, to use that term again, to the pioneers here. And just my gratitude and my thanks to how open St. Jerome has been, and the bringing together from Marie-Claude as well, of just really encouraging this partnership, this relationship. And I will say the response we're allowed to then have to industry and the needs, not just in New Hampshire, but the northern region of New England in general. So I look forward to the conversation today, and thanks once again for having me.
Thanks to Eric and Chuck for a great start to this conversation. Chuck, I wondered if you wanted to elaborate a little bit on the importance of vehicle electrification and the electrification of transportation to the economy in your part of the area. I know that Eric talked a bit about the manufacturing that's going on in the vicinity of St. Jerome. Obviously in northern Vermont and New Hampshire, that plays a smaller role, but if you wanted to talk about how you see your program supporting New Hampshire's economic well-being.
Sure, absolutely. People may have read recently from the Business and Economic Affairs Commissioner Taylor Caswell put out that we had a record summer last year, even in the pandemic, of visitors, particularly to the North Country. And, I always think of that as limited. Like we could be doing more, we could be doing a lot more. Our primary, sector is hospitality, recreation, tourism in the North Country. And I honestly, aside from the border being closed last year, I honestly see there's a real opportunity. If you were to come across the border down into Littleton, New Hampshire, sure, there are some charging stations there. However, if you want to come over to the White Mountains, there's a real emptiness. We saw the map earlier. There are not charging stations to get you over to Berlin, to Gorham side of the mountains, and to Mount Washington specifically, which is a major tourist attraction. So first of all, there's an infrastructure that's needed. There's going to be installation that's needed. There's going to be maintenance that's needed. But also, I feel a hesitation of anyone in the North Country to want to purchase electric vehicles because they are very limited. We heard Sam earlier say, the Nissan Leaf just going downtown. I would would pick on Tim Egan, who I know is over in Sugar Hill. For him to come over to Berlin and back, he needs to be real intentional about making sure he's got his charge, because there aren't stations over here. But I also see a need for a new workforce. Aside from hospitality, tourism, recreation, healthcare, and some municipalities, we don't necessarily have a robust workforce beyond into the manufacturing, as Eric talked about, or otherwise. So I also see there's a potential for a new industry to really break into the North Country. And I think some of it can be some of the manufacturing aspects. Littleton has an industrial park with, just some robust other types of, Rotaback or Genfoot, some of these great companies that are there. But I also see maybe there's an EV manufacturing aspect there, coming over the border, and maybe there's opportunity for growth and, allow New Hampshire once again to play catch up, but also, infuse the workforce in the North Country. So again, back to the reskilling, the pandemic has created what everyone called the great resignation, right? So folks are changing jobs, changing careers. Maybe now is the time. This might be the opportunity. And we're trying to be in front of that by training the workforce before things necessarily exist, trying to get in front of that.
Talking about the importance of the tourism industry certainly resonates here in Vermont. I know that there are two components. We need to have the charging infrastructure to support the people who are living and working locally, but we don't want to lag if the surrounding cities are seeing faster adoption than we are. We want to make sure people can get to our ski areas, etc., and so that we remain a tourist destination at New Hampshire as well. Eric and then Chuck, I think you could both weigh in on this, but what kind of interest are you seeing in these programs? How much recruiting do you have to do? Are potential workers seeing this as an area of growth, or is it taking a lot of energy on your part to attract people to be interested in these programs?
I can start, Chuck. Here in Quebec, well, we've seen increasing in the interest as much as the number of employment available for these people having these getting our diploma, but also people interested in being a part of that program. Usually for the first year, we were having maybe 10 to 15 students groups. Last year was a 25 student groups, and this week I had a kind of an information evening to give information about the program to all the people, and we had 80 person who had subscribed for that virtual information. So we see that, well, here the electric vehicle is much more on the roads. We see them more often. A lot of people are buying them. So, well, and we see also that the electrification of the transport is not only in cars, but as I said, on all other vehicles. So there's a lot of people who have that's working right now as mechanicians or electromechanicians that see this and say, well, that's a great career opportunities for me. So they're jumping in. And so, yes, I will soon have kind of too much people for the amount of students I can accept, which is a great problem for us.
Yeah, and I guess I'll jump in. We're still the new guy on the block, if I can say it that way. And since we're just rolling out our first introductory course, we're actually piloting it on our current students in our automotive technology program this semester. So students who initially signed up for our automotive program are fully understanding. All right, we need to understand and learn more about the EV side of things. So we're just dipping our toe in, and we don't even have it, quite built. We're a month out from Eric and his team coming down to do the train the trainer aspect of things. So we're probably, a few months out from being able to advertise and market. But I can tell you just from anecdotal, our students who are piloting, we do have a Switch Labs car, a kit car that came in from California we had ordered, and they've been taking it apart and putting it together over the course of the last 6 months or so. There's a lot of interest in, the number one advertising in the world is always word of mouth. So we've got students who are here now, hands-on learning, enjoying it, and I'm sure they're having conversations with friends and colleagues already.
Terrific. And Chuck, you mentioned the reskilling and upskilling a couple of times, and we do have workforces working in these areas. Community colleges have traditionally played an important role in those areas. I know there are a few national institutions that are offering some sort of more limited training. The electric vehicle infrastructure training program rather is offering a certificate for EVSE installers. The National Fire Protection Association is offering training to firefighters, because combating a fire with a lithium-ion battery is different than a gas tank. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as ways to engage the current workforce in doing that reskilling and upskilling?
Sure, and I would say it's very targeted. We have, I mentioned our advisory committee. We have folks on our advisory board for automotive technology, for example, from Berlin City, which is a dealership just down the road from us. And sometimes they're already getting specific dealer upgrades and training that's required, but they'll let us know where there are gaps. So then we can do some non-credit traditional training to bring them up to speed. The other thing we're doing is we're having direct conversations with Caterpillar. Milton Cat is a very big organization. Caterpillar's always been an excellent partner for us, but they're talking about how they're transitioning some of their equipment to electric and how they've got some internal training, but again, where we fit into the upskilling of folks that have been maybe out in the workforce for a while and need to have 3 or 4 modules. And that's part of our future conversation with Eric to say, how do we take this credit bearing program that we're currently using, whether it's for a certificate, degree, or transfer articulation, and be able to say, all right, if they just need this piece, how do they come in and spend those 4 weeks out of a 15-week term? So we're intentional there. I'm glad you mentioned firefighters, the difference there. One of our colleges, Lakes Region Community College, has the fire science program. So, as I speak about White Mountains, I also want to speak about the community college system. We all have special, customized programs, fire science being one of those. And I know this is something they're infusing. Beyond that, I also know there's an electrician program. My brother actually went through at Lakes Region Community College. We learned early in the game when we talked about charging stations, that is not a place we're going to get into. It's the installation where you definitely need an electrician, a specially trained electrician. However, Lakes Region Community College has that program. That's where they're going to get into, whether it's upskilling or early training as well. And I'll go back to the reskilling as well. I think there's a workforce out there looking to change jobs and has already resigned. And I think there's an opportunity here to target some folks that may want to get into a new clean energy position.
Just remind the audience, feel free at any point to raise a hand and we'll get questions from you as well. I've got a few more, and I know Tim Egan said that he had one, but anything you want to know about this, it's an important area, and we've got 2 great panelists, so feel free to jump in at any time. In the meantime, Eric, I wanted to direct to you, since you've been doing this for 5+ years now, and obviously monitoring very closely what's going on in industry. How has your curriculum evolved over that time period? Are there new components that you've been adding, or things that you've been recognizing as needs that you need to fill?
Of course, I would say that, well, basically every year we're gathering together while we're doing the program and say, well, what's happening new, what's new? And like Chuck said, we're training the next workforce with these new specialized technicians, but these companies, these manufacturers, they have already some needed for their employees that are already working and have some skills, but maybe don't have the level of skills that needed to their productions to be efficient. So we're working with them with customized training. So we take part of our program and build it and from company to another, that could be different. If we talk about the security, safety, working with the high voltage batteries. So while we're doing these trainings within the companies, the manufacturers, that help us to know what they're manufacturing, how they do it, what technologies they're using. So sometimes it's confidential, sometimes they share it with us. So we get the best knowledge this way, so we can go back to the work table and talk to each other to say what we're going to do next year, what we can improve in our program next year. So for some precise example, At the beginning, we're not doing CAN-bus communication. So now we're doing CAN-bus communication within our program. All the wiring, the crimpage of the wires, which is there's a norm, the IPC norm for this, the quality of the wire. So be sure to be able that all these systems are well connected and will work efficiently. Well, at the beginning, we were kind of doing an overlook on that, and we rapidly saw that this was a major skills needed within the industry. So right now, we're bringing our students to get a certification from IPC that will help them, and there's a very few of these workers having this certification. So that's some examples of how we're doing to make sure that our program is still up to date as the manufacturers are evolving in their technologies.
And if I can just give you a little opportunity to brag here, I understand that your placement for your students has been pretty phenomenal as far as them finding jobs in industry.
Yeah, over 90% of our students have found a job within the next few months after their program, after their 10 months of their programs. And also we have a few students that are, well, just going on their own business, like individual workers. Some of them are mechanicians that they have their own maintenance cars business, and now they can advertise their services being also EV maintenance technicians. So most of them, 90% plus, are working in EVs still after their program. So it's a great accomplishment for them, basically, because they're the ones learning these new skills. So all the honor comes to the students who are taking that program and the teachers who are making it living.
Of course, and it does speak to the need and the growth that we are seeing in this workforce.
And every time we place students in new industries and new companies, well, they kind of find out what we're doing with them. So we still, at the beginning, I was working with maybe 5 manufacturers, and right now my list is over 20 manufacturers that are interesting. So, and they need that workforce, of course. And what we're living here, like Chuck said, well, that's coming up to you. So that will be the situation in New England, New Hampshire, sooner or later, as much as the electrification of transport will go on. And we know now that it will.
Yeah, and a great opportunity replicating that in New Hampshire, Chuck, to bring some highly skilled workers into the workforce, which of course is just good for the region overall.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other aspect I would add, I mean, everything Eric's saying, I'm hoping happens in New England, frankly, in the next couple of years. And I hope, that's really why we're building this out. We're building for something we know should be here already, but hopefully shows up soon. The other piece I would just say is cross-training, where we've got our students, Eric's program is unbelievable, and everyone is getting jobs directly out of it, which is really kudos to him. And I guess for us, since in New Hampshire we're not quite there, I can feel a trepidation of pigeonholing, going specifically just EV for some of our students. So, and rightfully so, so they're trying to, we're talking about cross training. That's why I say embedding within automotive, within our diesel heavy equipment. So if a piece of equipment comes into Milton Caterpillar, they can work on either or. It also makes them more employable. So we're trying to, walk that fine line of not 100% shift and swing the pendulum. But to me, it's a transition. And I think this is phase 1, step 1, if you will, prior to be able to be to where Eric and his team are.
Yeah, there'll definitely be some transition, and we, can't change on a dime either in terms of skills or in terms of the fleet.
Right. Just to jump on that, what Chuck is saying is very important, because employers will look, for the employers here, the manufacturers hiring our students, they love their specialized skills in EVs, but they also always look at what is their background. Are there mechanicians? Are there electricians? Are there electromechanicians? And they get different jobs, different roles within the companies based on where they come from before getting these specialized skills in EVs. So the cross-training is very a major factor.
Linda, I see you've got a question. Did you have a question for the panel? We will loop back to Linda if she's having technical difficulties getting off mute here. I don't think I can do that from my side, but Linda will loop back in just a minute. Tim, you also mentioned that you had a question for the panel.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, actually, my question is either for Chuck or Eric. I was amazed to know earlier this summer that obviously EV vehicle repairs is a focus, but I noticed that Tesla has now gotten into competition with companies like Freightliner, Peterbilt, Mack, Volvo in trucking. Is there going to be sort of a curriculum differentiation between, and I mean, I know there would be, so can you explain it a little bit about the opportunities that it might create for EV trucking versus EV vehicle, whether it's repair, maintenance? I think I was fascinated to see another growth of the EV automobile industry, not just for personal cars, but for industrial transportation.
Sure, I'll take a quick stab and then give it to the expert Eric after. But our new facility really in Littleton is growth, Representative Egan, as you know, and we have a commercial driver training program there. So we're training people to drive trucks. We also are going to have our diesel heavy equipment program there to work both on-road and off-road. Now, 3 or 4 years ago, we were working primarily on off-road equipment, some of the large loaders, et cetera. We've infused now, we have on-road technology in there, Kenworth, Peterbilt, you name it. But also, that's why we're trying to infuse EV there as well. I'm sure I feel like I read in the newspaper every couple of days. Amazon just put in an order for 30,000 different trucks to be on. None of them autonomous, I believe, at this point, just electrified. So I think it's a very valid question. It is something when I go back to my cross training and raise it up one more step, is to say, if somebody comes in, number one, and has diesel heavy equipment as a background, wants to infuse EV. The other thing they're doing with us is they're signing up for our CDL program to learn to drive the truck. And so they can work on it, drive it, because the other thing, and I didn't think of this initially, but Kenworth, we're talking to them, they say, it's great, they can work on the truck, but they can't legally bring it in and out of the bag. So they're now getting their commercial driver's license. They're understanding how to work on it from the diesel heavy equipment. But yes, on-road trucking is in everything I'm learning, is going to be electrified before the off-road equipment is. Off-road equipment, the current barrier, in just a recent conversation with Chris Milton down at Milton Cat, the quick barrier is when you're starting new construction, you're out in a brand new field somewhere, you're not near the grid. Being able to run a large piece of equipment for 12 to 14 hours a day without charging is still pretty difficult to do. So the on-road seems to be the better option at the moment, particularly with stage 3 chargers. So, your question is right in line, Representative, and, we're trying to, again, thread the needle here to overlap, but also, get in front of this as well, with our facility.
On my side, I would say that, our program at bottom line is aiming to any kind of vehicles that could be electric. So, of course, cars are a big part of it, but the reality is that we're not producing electric cars in Quebec. We're producing basically everything else, but cars that would be in Ontario, Southern Ontario, for example. But we have trucks, we have buses, so within our programs, we're following that. So every year, at the end of a program, there's a project, a conversion project. So the students have to convert a gas vehicle to an electric vehicle. So right now we're doing cars. We have done motorcycles. We have done snowmobiles. We have done off-road vehicles. And I said in the beginning of the presentation, forestry, agricultural vehicles. We don't have that kind of vehicle in our program right now, but that's where we're looking at, because we know that, if it's coming, it's got to be part of our program, because we're aiming at training. I don't know if the word is good, but the generalist. It's kind of paradoxical because they're specialized technicians, but with a generalist skills among electric vehicles. So, of course, any vehicles could be electrified. So we have a look on that to make sure that every time there's a new branch of vehicles that are going electric, that we can include them in our program and to see if there's a difference to the thinking, the engineering of the vehicle, and the technology used. That could be a different vehicle will use different kind of battery, different battery chemicals, components, different cells, because different batteries will respond better to different needs. So that's what we're looking at. I don't know if that answered your question properly.
Most definitely did. Thank you very much, both of you.
Linda, you can go ahead now. Looks like you're off mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Good morning, Chuck, and bonjour, Eric. Representative Linda Massanilla, and I have a question for both of you. Eric and Chuck, what would you suggest as fledgling work programs and courses are developed? Should they begin their focus on the repair and maintenance of public stations, or should they look to the repair and maintenance of electric vehicles? And my second question is, do you know if there are any programs in existence now with high school automotive programs regarding electric vehicles?
Why don't I take the quick first stab, because it will be quick, and I'll turn to Eric. But the first part you're asking about is, when students are choosing basically a path, and they are two totally different paths. One is really the auto technology side of things, and the other is, I will say, you need an electrician, for the installation. And we've sort of divided, as I mentioned earlier, Lakes Region Community College is really focused on the installation, the electric side of this, the electricians, and we don't necessarily have that side. We have the automotive technology that doing some of the EV side of things. Your point about high school, really, that's where we recruit a lot of our students. Who's getting involved at the high school level? And it's my understanding we have a lot, just for the benefit of folks on the call. We have 27 different career and technical education centers spread throughout the state that are attached to high schools. These are our technical programs. A lot of them, majority of them, I believe it's 21 of them, have automotive technology programs. So that is a place that EV is coming into. Some of these switch lab cars, the tech cars that I mentioned earlier that become kits, some of those through the Department of Education are going out to the career and tech centers. New Hampshire Automobile Dealers Association as well has been supporting that. And I believe in the next year or so, Representative, they are starting to get there. Our automotive faculty are in communication with the career and tech centers to really create a feeder, a pipeline, but also a relationship. Kennett High School, which is out of North Conway, did the same training as our automotive instructor last year. When that kit car came, it came with a training, sort of a how to assemble, disassemble. So it's here. It's just not as advanced as where St. Jerome and Eric's team is at the moment, but it's certainly coming. I look forward to hearing what Eric has to say on this.
I'll start with the last question regarding the link with high school. You mentioned the path that the students want to have. Chuck, that's the bottom line. I mean, we have to make sure that these paths are interesting for the student. They're kind of a great answers to what they want to do with their careers. Here in Quebec, the automotive program and I would say heavy vehicles, mechanical programs are linked to the high school level. It's kind of a prolongation of when they reach their high school diploma, they can continue within the same institution and doing these automotive. So as a college, we come just the next step to make sure that they can become technicians. And our course, well, we have partnership with automotive schools, program schools in Saint-Jérôme, and also heavy vehicle mechanical schools in Saint-Jérôme. In fact, this is where we're giving our courses. We're actually sharing the facilities with them. So we have a great connection with these students. So they know that, well, well, they like the automotive mechanics, so they can take that program, and then after that, they can go and become technicians in EVs. Or right now, it's new. They have an answer. So if they want not to be a technician in the manufacturing of EVs, but stay at the maintenance level, they can do that too. So they don't have to take all of our program. They just continue their program. They have a kind of an added module of trainings that they give them the basic skills needed to do how can I say, the basic maintenance of EVs. So that's for, I would say, the high school. First question, what kind of program, if I remember well, what kind of program, what institution should be aiming at as a program? I would say it depends on the economic ecosystem that you have in your area. Do you have manufacturers? So you need to have technicians being able to work with engineers and create, fabricate, and producing these vehicles. If you don't have vehicle manufacturers, but you have a population that is buying electric cars, then maintenance will be your main focus, because that's what people are going to need. They're going to go back to the dealer, but they can use their independent mechanicians. So anybody who will have to do the after-sales service for these vehicles will need them. Also, if you have the school boards that are buying electric school buses, then, well, they'll need people to operate them, to do the maintenance. But if you have companies that are manufacturing, then maybe the technician level will be the good thing to aim at.
I think it's also interesting to see how companies are evolving to address this need before we have a fully developed workforce and a fully developed career path here. And I'll point again to some of our members who are, primarily solar installers, who are now also doing energy storage. They're putting Tesla power walls in people's homes, and they're putting charging infrastructure in people's homes. So these are people who have good expertise as electricians, and they're leveraging that into some of these vehicle adjacent fields. And I think all of that, the people who are doing that kind of work directly, and the more schools that are offering these programs, they make that career path visible to people who are, in high school now. And so that visibility is going to be really important to making sure that 5 years from now we have a larger crop graduating, and 10 years from now, when hopefully, our vehicle electrification is much farther along, we are able to address all of those needs on both the vehicle side and the support infrastructure side. Michael, I see you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everybody for this panel. At the beginning, Eric, you mentioned agricultural vehicles and other industrial products, and I think that might be of interest for some of the folks that are on the line. I know it would be interesting for me to hear that. We think a lot about larger trucks. We think a lot about personal use vehicles, but certainly in northern New England, I think the supportive vehicles on an agricultural and a farm and in industrial processes would be of interest. Could you share a little bit more on that and how you see the decarbonization of that sector going?
Well, I'll share with you what I know. Probably that one of the engineers of the Innovative Vehicle Institution will have a lot more to say, because I know that they're working on that. So right now it's in development. So there's project to make sure that, well, if we have an agricultural vehicle that is running in the field, well, could be electrified. So how can we manage to make sure that the certification will serve the farmer or owner of the agricultural plant to see, well, is it efficient? How long would be the autonomy of the vehicle? They're working also to making them, you said it earlier, Chuck, autonomous. Is that a good word?
Yeah. Self-driving.
So they're working on both. So right now, as I know, is that I have students that are working within their program at the institute, the IVI, that have worked on this program. But where it is at this time, I don't have any other information on this besides it's coming. They're working on it. So, and the fact is that, well, they're working on it. You know, when you're developing a new branch of electric vehicles, well, you have some bumps and jumps. So maybe at the beginning, the first solutions are not quite efficiently sufficient so that to have to market them. But if I take, for example, all the work they've done in the past years, I'm pretty sure that sooner or later they'll come up with solutions that probably it's going to be a choice that could be made when you buy these big agricultural vehicles, that you could have one with an electrification motorization instead of diesel or gasoline.
You know, there's only a matter of time before we electrify everything, and from a climate perspective, probably sooner rather than later would be good. I think we have time for one last question. Peter, I think you had flagged something that you were interested in.
A little more of a kind of a lighthearted question. I wonder, Chuck or Eric, if you've seen any surprising sources for workers, for the EV workforce, people looking to get reskilled or upskilled. Obviously, we can all think of how an automotive technician or diesel mechanic moves over to electric vehicles. But I wondered if you've been surprised by, you know, people who are good at telecommunications installation or personal computer repair or other fields like that. Are there people you've seen who, it turns out, when it's an electric car, they turn out to be a pretty good vehicle technician as well?
We've seen a little bit of every situation you've mentioned there. People with more of an informatic background doing great in our program because there's a lot of computer stuff in our program, of course. The main one that I could remember is that we have there's a policy that we can admit to our program people who don't have a first diploma like mechanicians or electricians, but based on their working experience. And so we have every year some students that are, I would call them self-engineers. So they don't have any diploma, but they like to work on electronic stuff, mechanicals. They're aware of the new technology. Sometimes they're aware of new technology news before we are. They bring this information to us within their program when they're participating in the program. So I could see that people even that didn't have a great, that's not a good word, didn't have any educational background really other than high school. They've worked all their life. Well, some of them are very great students because they build that knowledge, and they now with us can maybe structure that knowledge, these skills, to be able to know what they're doing instead of working more by instinct. Now they can maybe have a more prepared approach to the problem, the challenge they have to solve that we're giving them in the courses regarding motor, batteries, or even at the end, complete vehicles. So that would be my main surprise for me, was that, well, people arriving in our program without first diploma are doing well for most of them.
And I guess I would just add quickly, I know we're running short on time, but we're in our infancy, at this moment, clearly, but with our students just being introduced to the kit car in the lab, the students who come and talk, our welders are walking in, looking at that, our industrial mechanics, our folks working on power generation. There's an interest level of anyone who likes to work with their hands, people who like to critically think. I mean, more broadly, people look and say, geez, that's interesting. And just enough to say, when there's a course online or when there's a certificate, maybe I would get a stackable credential. Maybe that is something, from a personal interest level, not necessarily from a profession. And I think that's another whole, discussion down the road, is the personal interest of being able to maybe work on your own vehicle, or, be able to, to put things together. So there's a lot of we're high in the technical trades programs, and there's a lot of, people who like to work with their hands, understand how systems work and put things together and whatnot. So that's just some initial observations.
Well, thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Eric. This is a great discussion, and thank you to Peter and the NECBC for organizing this opportunity, and I think we'll yield before the closing remarks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John.
Very much, Peter Howe with New England Canada Business Council, and I want to say a huge thank you to all our terrific panelists that we've had this morning, and in particular, Michael Stoddard from Efficiency Maine Trust, Sam Evans-Brown from Clean Energy New Hampshire, and Jonathan Dowds from Renewable Energy Vermont. Thank you for moderating these panel discussions, and I feel we've had a superb discussion so far. Again, want to be sure to express our great thanks to our sponsors, Hydro-Québec and Liberty Utilities, and the Quebec delegation in the Quebec Government Office in Boston. And to finish our webinar today, I'm delighted to introduce two top officials from giving an electric utility perspective. We're going to have France Lemprand, who's the Executive Director of Electric Circuit Électrique, which is Hydro-Québec's public charging division, operating a network of charging stations all over the province. Chris Hilborn, Vice President, Customer Insights and Solutions from Liberty Utilities. And one of the things that I particularly love about this next conversation is that we'll hear from France talking about giving the perspective of a utility that has a lot of experience and is very far down the road. Just signed a deal last month with ChargePoint, so that ChargePoint works in Quebec. Quebec customers can roam onto ChargePoint in the United States, just the kind of coordination we need more of. So we have many years of rollout experience from Hydro-Québec and Electric Circuit to talk about. And Chris can also talk to us, what's it like for a utility that's more at the beginning of this process and thinking about how do we best play in the EV space, both directly and also as enabling technology for private investment, public-private partnerships. So with that, France, let me turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Peter. So I have to agree with you. The discussion this morning was extremely interesting. And whether we talked about profitability, design rate, very cold weather, utilization rate, business models. I mean, so many topics that we could talk about. So, the intent for this last 30 minutes is that I will give just a very brief overview of what we're doing at Hydro-Québec. Then I'll let my colleague do the same, and then we'll open up to discussion. So any topics that you want to address, we'll be happy to answer. So let me show you. I have just one page to give you an overview of what we're doing, and can you see it? I hope you can. Can you see it? No?
Maybe we'll have Emily or Susan, one of our helpers there, punch it up momentarily.
Okay. All right. So I'll start. So next slide, please. Okay. So Marie-Claude talked about it. So we have very specific targets in Quebec. So for 2030, we have an objective of 1.5 million of EVs on the road. And we also have the objective of ending the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles as of 2035. So these public policies are very important because they're really shaping the offers that we get from manufacturers and from dealerships. So us, Hydro-Québec, what we've committed to in order to reach those targets is that we're going to deploy 2,500 fast charging stations. And that is, and we talked about budget earlier this morning. So just to give you an idea, that objective for us translates into a budget of $400 million over about 10 years. So that's for the DCFCs. Right now we have 600 DCFCs that are available and in service throughout Quebec. And so the remaining is what we're going to finance with the $400 million. As for the L2 charging stations, and I keep repeating the same thing for years now, the L2, the level 2 charging stations or the standard charging stations are the backbone of our network. They are as important, if not more important, than the DCFCs, because the more level 2 charging stations we have, the less DCFCs we need. And remember that, of course, it is a lot more expensive to charge on a DCFC than it is to charge on a standard charging stations for obvious reason. So we want to try to alleviate the pressure on the DCFC sites by implementing as many L2 as we can. So that's for the charging stations. Now we are also looking at new sectors of activities for us. So the public charging network for light vehicles, we have specific objectives, and we keep on doing that full speed ahead. Besides the volume of charging stations that we're working on, we're always working on improving the service to our customers. So we have a new mobile application that allows our the members of the electric circuit to use a trip planner. We also are offering now commercial offers to our members. So what that means is that when you are when you are fast charging, you're there for 20-30 minutes, and Rose alluded to that in her presentation. Now people, they want more service. So when we started 10 years ago, because this year it's going to be the 10th anniversary of the electric circuit. So when we started 10 years ago, people were really, really enthusiastic, and they were the early adopters, and they did not mind. They would go charge in a field in the dark, and they were happy. Now that we have the general public using our equipment, we have to be more sophisticated in the offer that we're giving to our customers. And one aspect of that is offering them commercial offers while they're charging. So if they're charging for 20 minutes, we're offering them a rebate on a meal, maybe a free water bottle, maybe a rebate on something in the retail store. So the intent is always to make their charging experience more pleasant. So, and we're coming up with new ideas all the time to make sure that the customer experience is really optimal. So that's the public charging for light vehicles. Now, what we're looking at now is public charging also, but for heavy duty vehicles. And that's a whole different ball game, because we cannot have heavy duty vehicles come to the same charging station as the light vehicles. Sometimes it's not the technology that's a problem. It really is the structure of the site that needs to be different. So this is something that we're looking at. We're also looking at offering charging services to taxis. So taxis cannot wait. They have to have an available charging station. How do we do that? Do we reserve them? So we have different ideas that we want to experiment in a pilot project. And we're also thinking of the garage orphans. So I believe it was Barry Wood this morning that was saying that most of the charging is done at home. And it is true. Right now, it is completely accurate, but we know that is changing. So in Montreal, for instance, there's a lot of people who do not have access to a driveway or to even a set parking. So they are garage orphans, and they need a way to charge their electric vehicles, particularly in the context where our government has decided that as of 2035, they will have to charge somewhere. So this is something that we're looking at, and then what we're also doing is that we're testing the different technologies. Inductive charging is one of them. Autonomous charging station. So autonomous, not in the sense that it will charge the car on its own, autonomous from the grid. So we heard about that this morning as well. What do we do when we're in the middle of nowhere and there's no three-phase power? So we have this project where the charging station is powered by a battery and solar panel, and that could be put in those pieces of road where there is no network from the grid. Last but not least, a mobile charging station, whether it be for different events, temporary events, or whether it be for people who do not have electricity anymore. So this is another technology that we're looking at. And the V2G, well, this is a pilot that we've done a few years ago, and I'll be happy to talk about it if you are interested. So that's it for now for me. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague. Thank you.
Franz. Can you hear me, Peter?
Yes, Chris, you're good.
Fantastic. So, hey, thanks everyone, and thanks for that, Franz. It's you are in such a different place than we are as Liberty Utilities. So, thanks to the NECBC for having me here today. Liberty Utilities is in the footprint. I'm really excited to talk about what we're doing. So, for folks that don't know Liberty, we're natural gas, water, and electric utilities. We have over 1 million customer connections, mainly in the US and Canada. And we're slightly different than, I'd say, the normal utility because we're growing. We just this month acquired 125 new water connections in New York. And we're in the process of acquiring another 225 electric connections in Kentucky. Knock on wood, that'll be part of our portfolio in Q3 of this year. And so within New England and Eastern Canada, we have 50,000 electric connections in New Hampshire and about 200,000 gas connections in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and New Brunswick. So some of you may be our customers. So I lead a team called Customer Insights and Solutions. We're really focused on enabling a great customer experience across these utilities. And part of this includes products and services, which is EVs. So, Emily, if you could put up the first slide for me. I guess our mantra overall is that, as an electric utility, and I'll speak from the electric utility perspective right now, we need to be able to support our customers in the way they want, when they're ready for EVs. It would be a really bad day for us at Liberty if a customer bought an EV and we weren't able to support them. So, what have we been doing? Well, first of all, we studied our grid and, based on the anticipated rate of adoption in New Hampshire, in Missouri, and in California, where it's a little more advanced, as we know, we're able to support the EV growth. So now it's really about, what programs can we put in place? How can we help our customers? How can we do a bit of a push, a bit of a pull to bring them along? And, these programs are really focused on residential, business, schools, public, where our customers are going to want. So maybe flip to the next slide for me, Emily. So our current programs are really aligned with what we're hearing from our customers, the rate of adoption, but we're pushing the envelope a bit. And we're pushing the envelope in terms of, how can we help our customers? How can we help them think more about EVs, feel more comfortable with EVs? And, as we heard from many panelists today, we're learning as we go. So I think it was Michael that discussed how rural areas can be a real challenge, right? And coincidentally, most of our utilities are in rural areas. All of our electric utilities are in rural areas. We don't, unfortunately, have a city like Montreal, right? They're all small and very, very spaced out. So, and a couple of our utilities, both in New Hampshire and Missouri, are in non-ZEV states right now. So, the charging infrastructure is a bit limited. So, we took a look at this and we thought, well, how can we push this along? And we're actually further ahead in Missouri than New Hampshire. So let me just talk about Missouri for a bit. And and what we did there. So what we did is we went to our commissions, we went to our customer, customer commissions, and actually requested that we own some of this charging, that we jumpstart some of this, and we get it in place. And just last week, we actually had our filing approved. So we are the first utility in Missouri allowed to own our own infrastructure. And we're doing this because we truly believe it's best for our customers. It's going to jumpstart what we're doing. So what are we doing? The first thing we've done is we have a fast charger in place. It tells you a bit about the infrastructure when it's the first fast charger we just put in place. It's on a highway between Tulsa, St. Louis, and Kansas City, so a fairly important highway. And we'll be able to reduce any anxiety for travelers traveling through that area. Now, as part of this filing, we have 65 more fast chargers and L2s that have been approved. But it's not that the Missouri Public Commission or the Consumer's Office are writing us a blank check for these. As part of our filing, right, we need to demonstrate a need for the chargers. So we need to show the growth, show the data around that. We've agreed to share, and as part of it too, the costs are going to be recovered in part by the participants. So it's not fully on all customers. And we've agreed to share all the learnings openly. So there'll be a ton of data coming out of this, whether it's around usage times. There was discussion around demand charges today. And, we see this, I see this as an impediment as well, especially for, business fleets that may be charging overnight, and that'll draw just a huge demand. So, how can we move away from demand charges to other rate structures? We're also going to be looking at what Franz talked about is, how do we provide some charging in the event of an outage? If there's a storm event and we have ice storms in New Hampshire or tornadoes in Missouri, how do we ensure our customers, how do we give them the confidence that they can fuel their vehicles and use their vehicles as they need to? So we're working with FreeWire as well around some of our chargers having solar and storage to be able to charge these vehicles. So you can see very much we're in a learning process right now. It's very new for us. We see it as an iterative approach. We see it as very much a collaborative and partnering approach and learning as we go, right? In New Hampshire, Sam showed earlier that Eversource and Unitel had put in some filings. We'll be filing as well in 2023. So that'll increase the pool of money that we saw there. And, we feel it's the right time. We see our customers in New Hampshire starting to embrace EVs. Part of this, maybe there's a bit of an influx we see from Massachusetts into our areas in New Hampshire, and Massachusetts is a bit more further ahead in terms of EVs. There's better vehicle availability coming out, and we talked about the pickup trucks earlier. That's going to be a game changer. So we're going to do our part to accelerate this and ensure that our customers have what we need in New Hampshire. And Peter, I'll stop there. Give us 10 minutes for any questions or any discussion from our panelists or attendees.
Excellent. Well, I think my first question, which we could talk about all day, but Franz, I would love to ask you if you're thinking about lessons you could share from HQ's experience for New England utilities, appreciating HQ, different business model, different regulatory model, but still in that context, for utilities in New England like Liberty that are at the beginning of the EV curve, what are some things you would encourage them to think about based on the experience HQ and Electric Circuit have had?
That is a good question. We learned so many things. We made all the mistakes. So probably the one lesson that I would like to share with as many charging operators as I could is do not underestimate the financing that is needed to operate the charging stations once they're installed. So we've seen it everywhere in many, many jurisdictions. The operators are using often public money to deploy, and then there's no more money left to operate. And these charging stations are not completely mature in the sense that they need a lot of love. They need to be monitored. They need to be maintained, preventive maintenance. They need to be repaired when the snowplower just is a little bit too close to the charging station, and that's very costly. And I think people underestimate that a lot. And if we do not provide a good service, if we have EV drivers driving to charging stations that do not work, that is worse than no charging stations at all. We need to have them up and running, and we need them to be reliable. Otherwise, there's a lot of damage that is done to our cause, which is e-mobility. So I think that would be probably the first, the most important lesson that I would like to share. And yeah, it's very intensive. There's a lot of expenses.
Let me ask, I don't want to ask you to give away proprietary trade secrets, but if you're thinking about $10 million for EV deployments, what percentage of that might you recommend utilities hold in reserve for operating expenditures and maintenance?
Oh, well, I'd have to calculate, but you remember I gave you a figure of 400 million to deploy, let's say about 2,000 charging stations. And out of that, there was 80 million for OPEX. So I'd have to calculate what's
healthy 20%. That's good to know. And Chris, we noted with interest that you have in New Hampshire approved time of use rates for electric vehicle charging. I wonder if, just for people who may not be totally familiar with that, I wonder if you can say a little more about how that works and how important it is for you, Liberty Utilities, to make the economics work.
Yeah, great question. So we were actually asked or mandated to put in time of use rates, which we agree with, we fully agree with. It's important because, as you think about peak times during the day and in the winter where most of us are located, that's kind of between 7 and 9 a.m. and sort of 5 and 8 p.m., depending on the location. It can make a real difference to the grid and demand and greenhouse gas emissions. If everyone comes home from work and plugs in their vehicle at the same time. So the time of use rates, as I'm sure a lot of folks on this call know, is really to incent that charging to happen overnight, sort of between 12 and 12 p.m. or 12 midnight and 6 a.m. Right. So you're asking, how do we make it work? Well, from a utilities perspective, we are regulated, we have a rate of return. So really for us, from an electrification perspective, it doesn't mean we're necessarily going to increase our return because it's regulated. But what it means, and what I really like, is that it can lower the kilowatt per hour cost for all of our customers. So as EVs come on board and there's more usage, right? And most of the EV adoption right now is in more of the affluent space. The affluent customers are actually helping us all pay less per kilowatt hour. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to, is the reduction in that cost per kilowatt hour.
Great. Franz, we got a great question from, I believe it's Imran Kidwai. I apologize if I'm mangling your name. Question about mobile charging and how the scenario you see, who the user is, how mobile charging works in the real world.
So right now it's just a concept on paper. And this is something that we want to do this year. We see two applications for the mobile charging. For instance, let's say, and I know it sounds a bit foreign these days, but let's imagine that we have a festival of some sort with real people. And we know that there is going to be an affluence of EVs for that very event. We would like to be able to bring temporary charging station for that event, just to cater to the specific needs of that very day or that very week. So this is one of the applications that we're seeing. The other one, like I said, is really for people who run out of electricity, but that's a little bit more far-fetched, because it implies using fuels instead of a battery. So we don't know exactly, but the first application is definitely something that we're looking into. I hope that answers your question.
Excellent. No, it makes me think of cell sites on wheels for everybody's smartphones that they roll in for events like that. Yeah. I am mindful that we are getting up a bit against time, but Chris, one question I would love to put to you, again, a big question that I'm giving you a couple minutes to answer, how Liberty is thinking about being in this business directly yourself versus being a wholesale enabler, providing an enabling technology to other ventures. How are you thinking about that, in particular in New Hampshire?
Yeah, are you asking, Peter, whether we would compete with someone like a ChargePoint, or is your question slightly different? Yeah.
I mean, I have to put too fine a point on it, but are there what's the the scenario in which you think it makes sense for Liberty Utilities to be directly engaging with the customer and the customer's vehicle versus providing supportive technology?
Yeah. Okay. Ultimately, I think we want to enable our customers to be able to charge when they need to. And we're willing to do that in a partnership model with someone like a ChargePoint, who would come in and charge their rates, right? Or we're willing to do it on our own if that model doesn't necessarily work for some of the third parties like ChargePoint or Flow that we saw today, or FreeWire, right? And because it may not be as economical for them. What we do want to do, whether we go down either route, is ideally do some managed charging, so we can control the power that's going through the grid. Where we don't necessarily need it yet, but we will in the future. And yeah, that's probably the biggest thing for us, is having a piece in the managed charging and a piece in the data. And otherwise, we're willing to partner and collaborate or do it ourselves as we need to, whatever's best for our customers.
That's great to know.
And May Francis, I chime in on that?
Give you the last word, the dernier mot.
Okay, I just wanted to add a little bit on what Chris said, because the very reason that Hydro-Québec decided to get involved in the public charging was because nobody else would. And we wanted to just give this impulsion to the market. And we're even thinking now, I mean, at some point, if the private sector is populating the public charging space, maybe we will withdraw, because the only reason we're there is to fill a void. So at some point, Hydro-Québec might stop doing that. So anyways, that gives you a bit of perspective on our vision with regards to public charging. So yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I thought that the discussions were extremely interesting, and I'd be willing to pursue them with the participants should they need any more information from us. So thank you very much.
No, that's great. No, thank you, Franz, so much. And thank you, Chris. I want to say again, a big thank you to everybody who's joined us today. And any questions that you have, please, reach out in terms of following up with specific panelists. You can send your questions to New England Canada Business Council, and we'll be sure to route them in the right direction. We'll also be making recordings available from today to people as well. And one last time, could not have done this today without the generous sponsorship from Liberty Utilities, from Hydro-Québec, from the Quebec Government Office in Boston. This is what we hope will be the first of many conversations that NECBC helps facilitate about electric vehicles, and in particular, how our two countries and regions can best work together. So thank you so much to everybody for participating. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to resuming this conversation again soon.